The morning Declan Mercer decided to destroy his own life, the sky over West Texas stretched thin and pale, like old canvas pulled too tight. October had arrived mean that year, bringing winds that tasted of dust and the kind of cold that worked its way through wool and into bone. He stood at the edge of Clover Ridge Market with his hat pulled low, watching the crowd move between stalls like water around stones. Nobody recognized him. That was the point. For 3 weeks, he'd been growing out his beard, dulling his boots with mud, and wearing clothes that had actually seen work. The transformation hadn't been difficult. What surprised him was how easy it felt to shed the weight of being Declan Mercer, cattle baron, landowner, the man whose name people spoke carefully, like handling something that might bite. He'd left his ranch before dawn, telling no one where he was going. His foreman would assume he'd ridden out to check the northern pastures. His mother would assume he was avoiding her lectures about marriage and legacy. Both would be wrong, though his mother was closer to the truth than she knew. Declan had everything. That was the problem. At 32, he owned more land than most men could ride across in a day. His cattle grazed across 3 counties. Banks offered him money he didn't need. Women smiled at him with calculation in their eyes, and men agreed with opinions he hadn't finished speaking. Respect, they called it. Declan knew better. They respected his money, his power, the fact that crossing him could mean losing everything. But the man underneath? The person he might have been if his father hadn't built an empire and died expecting his son to maintain it. That man was a stranger even to himself. So here he stood, anonymous in the crowd, searching for something he couldn't name. The market sprawled across the town square, a chaos of voices and commerce. Vendors hawked everything from horseshoes to hand pies, their shouts braiding together into a noise that was almost musical. The smell of roasting meat mixed with leather and livestock, and the bittersweet scent of apple cider. It was the cider that caught his attention first, or rather, the woman making it. She stood behind a rough wooden stall near the market's edge, half hidden behind barrels and baskets of apples. Slight, pale, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pinned back in a way that suggested function over fashion. Her dress was clean, but worn thin at the seams, the kind of garment that had been mended so many times it was more repair than original fabric. But it was the way she moved that stopped Declan cold, efficient, relentless. She hefted a basket of apples that must have weighed 40 pounds, carried it to the press without pausing, and began feeding fruit into the mechanism with practiced rhythm. No wasted motion, no complaint. When a customer approached, she wiped her hands on her apron, poured cider with steady grace, made change, and returned to the press before the transaction had fully registered. She worked alone. That struck him as odd. Most vendors at Clover Ridge ran family operations, husbands and wives, parents and children, siblings sharing the load. This woman carried everything herself. Fresh cider, Boone's Orchard cider, best in the territory. The voice came from a man seated on a stool near the front of the stall. Heavy-set, 50s, with a face that weather and whiskey had carved into something hard and mean. He gestured broadly at passers-by, his movements large and theatrical, while the woman behind him pressed and poured and lifted without acknowledgement. "You there, friend, when's the last time you tasted real cider, not that watered-down swill they serve in town?" The man's voice carried authority, the kind that expected obedience, but his eyes didn't match his bluster. They tracked the woman's movements with something between supervision and suspicion, like he was watching valuable property that might depreciate if he looked away too long. Declan drifted closer, positioning himself where he could observe without drawing attention. Years of reading men in business negotiations had taught him to notice details others missed. The woman's hands, he saw now, were marked with old scars and fresh scratches. Her shoulders carried tension like a permanent condition, and despite the cold, sweat dampened the hair at her temples. She was exhausted. Not tired from a long morning, but exhausted in a way that lived in the bones, the kind that sleep couldn't fix because it stemmed from something deeper than physical labor. "How much?" A customer pointed at the cider. "2 bits a cup, 4 for a jug," the man said quickly, standing up to intercept the transaction. But the woman was already pouring, her movements automatic. "That'll be 2 bits, sir," she said quietly. Her voice surprised Declan, soft but clear, educated even. Not what he expected from someone working themselves to death at a market stall. The customer paid the seated man, who pocketed the coins without comment. The woman returned to the press. Declan watched this pattern repeat 3 more times. The man called out to customers. The woman did the actual work. Money changed hands, always through the man's fingers first. And through it all, she never slowed, never stopped, never met anyone's eyes for longer than necessary. Lydia, the Hutchinsons want a barrel delivered by Friday. Tell them yes. The woman, Lydia, glanced up. We don't have a barrel ready. The pressing schedule, I said tell them yes. The man's voice dropped into something dangerous. Or should I explain to them why Boone's Orchard can't keep commitments? Lydia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Papa. Papa. So that was the relationship. Declan studied the man with new attention, mentally cataloging details. Luther Boone. He'd bet money on it. He'd heard the name before, always attached to some scheme or failed venture. A man perpetually on the edge of success if you asked him. A drunk and a bully, if you asked anyone else. Lydia returned to the press, but her rhythm had changed. Faster now, with an edge of desperation. Trying to make up time that didn't exist. Declan moved to the stall. I'd like to try your cider, he said, directing the words to Lydia rather than her father. It was a small rebellion, but deliberate. Luther Boone stood immediately, smile ready. Of course, my daughter makes the finest. She makes it, Declan interrupted, keeping his tone casual, but letting the question land. I assumed you did, the way you've been advertising. Luther's smile froze for half a second. Well, naturally, it's a family operation. I oversee the orchard, manage the business, ensure quality. While she does the actual work, Declan said it flatly, not as a question. The air between them sharpened. Luther's eyes narrowed, reassessing this stranger in mud-dulled boots, who apparently didn't understand how conversations with his betters should go. Before Luther could respond, Lydia stepped forward with a cup. 2 bits, sir. Declan accepted the cider, his fingers briefly brushing hers. Her hands were cold despite the labor, the kind of cold that came from being too thin, too overworked, without enough food or rest to maintain basic warmth. He handed her a silver dollar. Keep the change. Sir, I can't. Kit. You can. He met her eyes directly. They were gray, he noticed. Storm cloud gray, and currently filled with the kind of wariness that came from too many kindnesses that turned cruel. Considerate payment for honest work. He drank. The cider was excellent, crisp, balanced, with complexity that spoke to careful selection and processing. This wasn't accident or luck. Whoever made this understood their craft. This is remarkable, he said to Lydia, ignoring Luther entirely now. How long have you been making cider? Since I was 12, sir. The answer came automatically. Then she seemed to catch herself, as if worried she'd said too much. 12. Declan let that sit. She'd been carrying this operation for over a decade, while her father postured and pocketed the profits. And you select the apples yourself? Manage the pressing schedule? Yes, sir. The orchard is a family legacy, Luther interjected, his voice hardening. 4 generations of Boones have worked that land. My daughter merely assists with certain... Your daughter? Declan turned to Luther with the full weight of attention he normally reserved for business rivals. Does all of it. I've been watching for 20 minutes. She's lifted more weight than most men could manage, served every customer, maintained equipment, and answered questions you couldn't. So let's dispense with the fiction that you contribute anything beyond volume. The market seemed to quiet around them, though Declan knew that was probably perception rather than reality. Luther's face darkened, blood rising to mottled cheeks. But before he could respond, a woman in an expensive dress approached the stall. Luther Boone, as I live and breathe. She air-kissed near Luther's cheeks, pointedly not acknowledging Lydia. I've been meaning to visit the orchard. People say your operation has quite recovered from last year's difficulties. Completely recovered, Mrs. Hartwell. Better than ever, in fact? Luther's demeanor shifted instantly, all charm and deference. Though I confess the work never ends. Managing an agricultural enterprise requires constant... Lydia handled the recovery. The words came out of Declan's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak them. After the frost damage, she researched resistant varieties, restructured the pressing schedule, and rebuilt the customer base. Your husband bought 3 barrels last month, Mrs. Hartwell. The woman who made that cider is standing right there. Mrs. Hartwell's gaze flickered to Lydia with the kind of polite disinterest wealthy women reserved for competent servants. How industrious! She turned back to Luther, already dismissing Lydia from consideration, and began discussing an order for an upcoming party. Lydia had returned to the press, her face carefully blank. Declan watched her work, the set of her shoulders, the mechanical precision of her movements, the way she'd learned to make herself small and quiet, so people like Mrs. Hartwell could pretend she didn't exist while consuming the product of her labor. Something twisted in his chest. Anger, maybe. Recognition, certainly. He'd spent his entire life being valued for what he represented rather than who he was. But at least people looked at him. Lydia had been erased from her own story so thoroughly that even customers drinking her cider couldn't see her. The morning wore on. Declan stayed near the stall, buying another cup of cider he didn't need, watching the dynamics play out again and again. Luther greeted customers, collected money, basked in compliments about his cider. Lydia pressed and poured and lifted and hauled, a ghost in her own operation. Around 11, a boy arrived with a message. Luther read it, cursed under his breath, and stood abruptly. "I need to handle business in town," he announced to no one in particular. Then to Lydia, "Keep things running, and don't give away product to every sad-eyed drifter who flatters you." He left without another word. Lydia's shoulders dropped fractionally, tension releasing. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself to pause. She poured herself a small cup of cider, drank it standing, and looked out at the market with an expression Declan couldn't quite read. Tired, yes, but also something else. Longing, maybe. For what, he couldn't say. He approached the stall again. "Your father seems demanding." Lydia's face shuddered immediately. "He works hard." "Does he?" It wasn't a question. Lydia met his eyes briefly, and in that moment Declan saw something that made his chest ache. Not anger or resentment, but the exhausted acceptance of someone who'd stopped hoping things might change. "You're very kind to say so, sir, but you don't know our circumstances. I know exploitation when I see it." Spoken like someone who's never been trapped. The words came out sharp, then she seemed to catch herself. "Forgive me. That was inappropriate." It was honest. Declan leaned against the stall. "I'm Eli, by the way." Eli. He scrambled for a surname that wouldn't raise questions. "Carter." "Lydia Boone." She wiped her hands on her apron, "though you apparently already knew that." "Your father announced it loudly enough." He paused. "You need help." "I don't accept charity." "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering labor. You're working yourself to death while your father plays merchant prince. Hire me." Lydia stared at him like he'd started speaking another language. "Hire you?" "I'm drifting through the territory, looking for work. You clearly need another set of hands. I work hard, I learn fast, and I don't require much. Room, board, and a small wage." "Sir," "Eli, I can't afford to hire anyone." "Then pay me in cider and meals until the operation can support wages." He kept his voice even, reasonable. 1 week trial. If I'm not worth feeding, I'll move on." "Why would you want to work a cider press?" The question hung between them, loaded with suspicion earned from too many disappointments. Declan considered his answer carefully. The truth? That he was searching for something authentic? That he needed to know if anyone could value him without his name and wealth? Would sound insane. So he offered a truth that was simpler, if incomplete. "Because I'm tired of being somewhere I'm not needed, and you look like you could use someone who actually shows up." Lydia studied him for a long moment. Her gray eyes were sharp, assessing, looking for the angle, the catch, the inevitable betrayal. Declan kept his expression neutral, letting her look. Finally she sighed. "I can't make that decision without my father's permission." "Then ask him. He'll say no." "You won't know until you try." "You don't know him." Something bitter crept into her voice. "He doesn't like being questioned, and he definitely doesn't like his daughter making business decisions." So make it his idea. Declan had negotiated enough deals to know how this worked. Tell him you can expand production with an extra worker. More production means more profit. Frame it as an opportunity for him to grow the business. That's manipulation. That's survival. Declan met her eyes steadily. You've been surviving for a long time, Lydia Boone. I suspect you know exactly how to handle your father. The question is whether you're willing to risk it for a stranger's help. She turned away, organizing apple baskets that didn't need organizing. He could see her thinking, weighing risks against exhaustion, hope against experience. 1 week, she said finally, not looking at him. If you can convince my father, and if you can actually do the work, most men can't handle the press for more than a few hours. I'll manage. We'll see. She glanced at him sidelong. You talk like an educated man, Eli Carter. Drifters usually don't quote business strategy. I read. Extensively, I'd guess. Her tone had shifted slightly, some of the wariness replaced by curiosity. Where are you from? East, Declan said vaguely. Moved around a lot. Never found a place that felt worth staying. And you think a failing cider orchard in the middle of nowhere might be that place? I think honest work with honest people might be? Lydia laughed, short and sharp. Then you're going to be disappointed. There's nothing honest about this operation except the cider itself. Before Declan could respond, a commotion erupted near the market center. Raised voices, the kind that drew crowds. Lydia tensed immediately. Stay here, she said, already moving around the stall. Declan followed anyway. At the center of the growing crowd, Luther Boone stood facing a well-dressed merchant, his face purple with rage. Tried to cheat me, Luther was shouting. I delivered quality goods, and you're attempting to short pay based on fabricated complaints. The barrels leaked, Luther. That's not fabrication. That's reality. The merchant's voice carried the patient exasperation of someone who'd had this argument before. I can't sell damaged goods. My daughter made those barrels herself. There was nothing wrong with them. Then perhaps your daughter needs better training, the crowd murmured. Some people nodded agreement with the merchant. Others looked uncomfortable, unwilling to take sides but unable to look away from the spectacle. Lydia had stopped at the crowd's edge, frozen. Declan saw her hands curl into fists, saw the way she'd stopped breathing. You're calling my daughter incompetent? Luther's voice rose another notch. A man insults my family and expects me to accept it? I'm calling your product defective, the merchant said tiredly. Which it was. I'm happy to show you the damaged barrels if you'd like to verify. I want my full payment, and I want functional merchandise. We both seem to be disappointed. Luther lunged. The merchant stepped back, and 2 men from the crowd quickly grabbed Luther's arms, holding him back. He struggled, still shouting, making a scene that would be discussed for weeks. And through it all, every eye in that crowd eventually found Lydia. She stood very still, chin up, hands still fisted at her sides, taking the blame her father was broadcasting across the market, letting herself be judged for work she'd probably done perfectly, for failure that likely stemmed from her father's corner cutting or poor wood selection or any of a dozen ways Luther Boone could have sabotaged his own product. The merchant's gaze landed on her. Miss Boone, I bear you no ill will. If you'd like to inspect the barrels yourself and identify the issue, I'm happy to. She'll do no such thing. Luther wrenched free of the men holding him. Come here, Lydia. Now! The command cracked across the market like a whip. Lydia moved forward mechanically, each step obviously forced. When she reached her father, he grabbed her arm hard enough that Declan saw her wince. Tell him, Luther demanded. Tell him those barrels were perfect when they left our orchard. Papa, I can't. Tell him. I don't remember those specific barrels, Lydia said carefully. If you'd let me examine them, I could identify. You're calling me a liar? Luther's voice dropped to something dangerous. In front of all these people, you're suggesting I don't know my own product? No, Papa, I just... Kneel. The word fell into silence. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Papa, please. I said kneel. Luther's grip on her arm tightened. You've embarrassed this family enough. Show proper contrition. Lydia's face had gone white. Her eyes darted across the crowd, looking for intervention that wasn't coming. People shifted, looked away, found sudden interest in their boots, or the sky, or anything but the woman being forced to her knees in the dirt. Declan felt something snap inside his chest. He moved without thinking, crossing the space between himself and Luther Boone in 5 long strides. His hand closed around Luther's wrist, the one gripping Lydia's arm, with enough pressure to make the older man gasp. Let go of her, Declan said quietly. Luther's eyes widened, then narrowed. "This is family business, stranger. Move along." "I'll move when you release your daughter." "Who the hell do you think you are?" The question hung in the air. Declan felt the weight of it, felt the crowd's attention swing toward him, felt the layers of his disguise threatening to crack under the pressure of rage that wanted to announce exactly who he was and what power he could bring to bear. But that would defeat the entire purpose of this experiment. So instead, he squeezed Luther's wrist harder and said, "Someone who knows cruelty when he sees it." Luther tried to jerk away, but Declan held firm. Their eyes locked. In that moment, Declan let just enough of his real self show through. The man who owned half the territory, who'd broken competitors and ended careers with a word. The predator beneath the prey animal's disguise. Luther went very still. "Let go of your daughter," Declan repeated. "Now." Slowly, Luther's fingers uncurled. Lydia pulled free immediately, stumbling back. Declan released Luther's wrist and stepped between them, putting himself in the position of shield. "You've made a mistake," Luther said, but his voice shook. "The only mistake," Declan said, "was yours. Now apologize to your daughter." "I will not apologize." Something in Declan's tone made Luther reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. The crowd had gone completely silent, watching this confrontation with the kind of attention usually reserved for public hangings. "Lydia," Luther's voice was tight, "I spoke harshly." It wasn't an apology, barely qualified as acknowledgement, but Declan recognized he'd pushed as far as this moment would allow. He glanced back at Lydia, who was staring at him with an expression mixing gratitude, terror, and something that might have been hope. "Go back to your stall," he told her gently. "I'll handle this." "You'll handle nothing," Luther snarled, finding his courage now that Declan had released him. "You're a drifter making trouble. I'll have the sheriff— Oh, call him." Declan's voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who'd never worried about the law. "I'm sure he'd be interested in public abuse. Maybe check those barrels himself while he's at it." Luther's face went through several colors. Around them, the crowd murmured. The merchant who'd started this whole confrontation looked deeply uncomfortable. "This isn't over," Luther finally said. But he was already backing away, already looking for an exit from a situation he'd lost control of. "Come on, Lydia, we're leaving." "Actually," Declan said, "Lydia was about to hire me." Everyone stared. Lydia looked like she might faint. "What?" Luther's voice climbed an octave. "Your daughter needs help at the orchard. I need work." She was just explaining how much more productive the operation could be with additional labor. "Weren't you, Lydia?" He turned to her, gambling everything on the hope that she'd understand what he was doing. Giving her an out. Giving her father a face-saving way to accept help he'd never agree to if he thought it was her idea. Lydia's eyes met his. For 3 heartbeats, he thought she'd refuse. Reject his interference, choose the known hell over uncertain salvation. Then she lifted her chin and said, "Yes, we were discussing a trial period, 1 week, room and board only." "I don't recall agreeing to this," Luther blustered. "You're always saying the operation needs to expand, Papa." Lydia's voice had found steadiness from somewhere. "Eli has experience with agricultural work. If he can increase our output enough to justify the cost of feeding him, it benefits the business." Luther looked between them, clearly searching for the trap. The crowd still watched, and Declan knew that mattered. Luther Boone cared desperately about appearance. Being seen to refuse free labor would make him look either incompetent or cruel. "1 week," Luther finally bit out. "But you vouch for him, Lydia. If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility." It was a terrible deal, and they both knew it. But Lydia's eyes held something that might have been defiance, and Declan felt a surge of respect for this woman who just gambled what little safety she had on a stranger's word. The crowd began to disperse, entertainment over. The merchant muttered something about rescheduling their discussion and disappeared quickly. Within minutes, the market had returned to its normal chaos, the confrontation already becoming gossip. Lydia walked back to her stall without looking at either of them. Luther followed, then grabbed Declan's arm. "I don't know what you're playing at," he said quietly, "but if you think some heroic rescue means anything, you're wrong. She's my daughter, my property, and whatever you're hoping to get from this situation, I promise you won't." Declan pulled his arm free. "I'm here to work." Nothing more. Everyone wants something. Luther's eyes were hard and knowing. I'll figure out what you're after soon enough. He walked away, leaving Declan standing in the market square, wondering if Luther Boone was right. Did everyone want something? Was genuine altruism even possible, or was every kindness just another transaction? The questions followed him back to Lydia's stall, where she was methodically packing up barrels and equipment. She didn't look at him as he approached. "Thank you," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being the kind of person who needs rescuing. For dragging you into my family's mess. Stop." Declan kept his voice gentle. "You have nothing to apologize for." "I have everything to apologize for." Lydia finally met his eyes. "You just made an enemy for a stranger. My father doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. Neither do I." Something flickered across her face. "You don't know what you've signed up for. The work is brutal. My father will make it worse just to prove a point. And at the end of your week, when you leave, I'll still be there, still trapped. You'll have accomplished nothing except making my life harder." The honesty of it stung worse than any accusation, because she was right. What was his plan, really? Play farmhand for a week, feel good about helping, then return to his life of wealth and power while Lydia remained locked in her prison? "Then maybe I'll stay longer than a week," he heard himself say. Lydia laughed, bitter and tired. "No one stays. They get close enough to see how bad it really is, and then they leave. My mother did. Every worker my father's ever hired did. Everyone who's ever promised to help me did. You will too." Maybe. The admission surprised her. She'd clearly expected protestations of loyalty, promises he couldn't keep. Instead, Declan offered the only truth he had, acknowledgement that he might fail her, same as everyone else. "At least you're honest about it," she said finally. She hefted a barrel, movements returning to that efficient, mechanical rhythm. "Come on, we need to get this loaded before sunset. Welcome to Boone's Orchard, Eli Carter. I hope you're ready for the worst decision you've ever made." Declan picked up a barrel and followed her toward a wagon that had seen better decades. Behind them, the market continued its noisy business. Ahead, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. And somewhere in the distance, Declan thought he could smell apples. The scent would haunt him for months to come, sweet and bitter, promise and rot. The smell of fruit that could become either cider or vinegar depending on who handled it with care. He climbed into the wagon beside Lydia Boone and didn't look back. The man he'd been that morning, Declan Mercer, cattle king, one of the wealthiest men in Texas, was gone. In his place sat someone new, untested, with calluses still forming and no idea what he'd find at an orchard where hope came pressed and bottled, if it came at all. The wagon lurched forward, and with that motion, everything changed. The road to Boone's Orchard stretched 12 miles west of Clover Ridge, winding through scrub country where the grass grew in patches and the trees looked like they'd been arguing with the wind for decades. Lydia drove the wagon in silence, her hands light on the reins despite the exhaustion Declan could see settling deeper into her shoulders with each passing mile. He'd offered to drive. She'd refused without looking at him. Luther rode ahead on horseback, maintaining enough distance to avoid conversation, but close enough to remind them both of his presence. Occasionally, he'd glance back, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "He's going to test you," Lydia said finally, her voice barely audible over the wagon's creaking. "Tonight, probably. He'll want to establish that you're not actually helping me, you're working for him. Let him try. I'm serious." She did look at him then, her gray eyes catching the last of the sunlight. "My father's greatest talent is making people regret their kindness. If you have any sense, you'll leave before sunrise." "I don't scare easily." "Then you're a fool." But there was something in her voice that might have been relief. They fell back into silence. Declan studied the landscape, trying to memorize details that might matter later. The land here was harder than his own ranch territory, less forgiving. Water would be a constant concern. The soil looked decent enough, but thin in places. Growing anything here would require knowledge, persistence, and luck in equal measure. 20 minutes later, Luther turned off the main road onto a rutted track that disappeared between rows of apple trees. The orchard announced itself gradually. First a few scattered trees, then organized rows that spoke to planning done decades ago by someone who'd understood their craft. The house emerged from the gathering darkness like something from a cautionary tale. 2 stories, timber frame, probably built 40 years ago and not updated since. The porch sagged on the left side. Several windows were covered with oiled paper instead of glass. The roof looked like it had been patched repeatedly with whatever materials were available, creating a patchwork that probably leaked during heavy rain. Behind the house, Declan could make out the shape of a barn, a storage shed, and what looked like the press building. Everything carried the same air of determined decay, functional but barely, maintained by someone with more will than resources. Luther dismounted and disappeared into the house without a word. Lydia guided the wagon toward the barn, her movements automatic. "I'll show you where to stable the horse," she said. "Then you can have the spare room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's warm. We eat at 6, work starts at 5. 5 in the morning? Earlier in harvest season, which we're in." She climbed down from the wagon, stumbling slightly. Declan reached to steady her, but she'd already caught herself. "The apples don't care if we're tired." The barn smelled like hay and old wood and something else. Apples, Declan realized. The scent had seeped into everything, sweet and insistent. Lydia showed him how to unhitch the horse, where to store the tack, how to measure the feed. She moved through the instructions with the patience of someone who'd explained these tasks many times before. "You've had workers quit on you," Declan observed. "Quit, been fired, left in the night." Lydia forked hay into the stall. "My father's temper is legendary. Most men don't last a week once they realize he's not actually interested in help. He's interested in control." "And you?" She paused, the fork suspended mid-motion. "What about me? How long have you lasted?" "I don't have the option of leaving." She resumed forking hay, her movements sharp. "This is my home. My inheritance, supposedly, though Papa reminds me regularly that a woman can't actually run an orchard alone. That I need him. That without his guidance and protection, I'd lose everything." "Do you believe him?" "I used to." Lydia set the fork aside. "Come on, I'll show you your room before Papa finds something for you to do." The kitchen was cleaner than Declan expected, though the furniture was as worn as everything else. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the room with the smell of stew. Lydia ladled out 3 bowls with automatic efficiency, then led Declan to a narrow door beside the pantry. The room beyond was barely larger than a closet. A cot, a small table, a hook for clothes. A single window looked out toward the orchard, but the blanket on the cot was clean, and someone had left a pitcher of water on the table. "It's not much," Lydia said. "It's fine." Declan set down his pack, the one he'd carefully prepared 3 weeks ago with the kinds of possessions a drifter might own. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." She hesitated in the doorway. "Eli, about what happened at the market, you don't have to explain." "I do, though." Her hands twisted together. "You need to understand what kind of man my father is. He doesn't just get angry, he gets calculated. He'll smile at you tomorrow, act like nothing happened, then find ways to make your life miserable that you can't quite prove are deliberate. Broken tools, dangerous tasks, criticism that sounds like teaching but is designed to humiliate. I've dealt with difficult men before. Not like him." Lydia's voice dropped. "My mother tried to leave when I was 9. He found her in town, dragged her back, and spent the next 3 years making sure she never tried again. She got sick that winter. Something in her lungs. He wouldn't pay for a doctor, said she was being dramatic. By spring, she was dead." The words settled between them like stones. "I'm sorry," Declan said, because there was nothing else to say. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. My father doesn't let people leave, and he doesn't forgive anyone who tries to help me break free." She met his eyes. "So whatever reason you have for being here, whatever you're running from or toward, it's not worth what he'll do to you." Before Declan could respond, Luther's voice bellowed from somewhere in the house. "Lydia, where's my supper?" She flinched, the reaction so automatic it made Declan's chest tight. "I have to go. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow starts early." She disappeared, leaving Declan alone in the tiny room with the smell of apples and the weight of understanding that he'd walked into something far darker than he'd anticipated. He sat on the cot, testing its stability. The frame creaked, but held. Through the thin walls, he could hear Lydia's voice murmuring something apologetic, Luther's responding in sharp bursts. A door slammed. Footsteps crossed above his head. Declan had grown up in a house where anger was cold and silence was weapon. His father had ruled through withheld approval and strategic disappointment. This was different. Messier, louder, more immediate in its cruelty. But the core was the same. Power wielded to break someone weaker. He thought about his ranch, probably settling into evening routines right now. His foreman would have noticed his absence by now, but wouldn't worry yet. His mother would be dining alone, irritated but not concerned. They'd assume he was handling business, closing deals, being the man his father had trained him to be. None of them would imagine him here, in a room smaller than his closet, preparing to haul apples for a woman he'd met that morning. The absurdity of it struck him suddenly. Declan Mercer, who'd never done a day of real labor in his life, who paid other people to maintain his empire, had just volunteered for the hardest work he could find. What was he trying to prove? That he was worth something beyond his name and money. That someone could look at him and see value in the person rather than the portfolio. That underneath the wealth and privilege, there existed a human being capable of honest connection. But looking around this spare room, listening to Luther's voice carrying through the walls, Declan wondered if he'd just traded one performance for another. At home, he played the role of cattle king. Here, he'd play the role of humble drifter. Either way, he was lying. Either way, no one saw the real him. Because the real him, whoever that was, had been buried so deep under expectations and responsibilities that Declan wasn't sure he existed anymore. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Lydia stood there with a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread. "You missed supper," she said. "Papa's already gone to bed. He drinks after arguments, sleeps heavy." Declan accepted the food. "Thank you." Lydia lingered in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really intervene today? At the market?" Her eyes searched his face. Men don't risk themselves for strangers, not without reason. Declan considered lying, offering some noble excuse. But Lydia's gaze was too direct, too knowing. She'd spent her life reading her father's moods to survive. She'd spot a false answer immediately. "I saw someone being treated like they didn't matter," he said finally, "and I couldn't stomach it. That's still not a reason, not one that explains gambling your safety. Maybe I was tired of watching and doing nothing." "About what?" The question landed precisely where Declan's defenses were weakest. He looked down at the stew, buying time. How did he explain a lifetime of privilege that felt like imprisonment, a fortune that meant nothing when his mother looked at him and saw only his father's legacy, success that tasted like failure because it had never actually been his? "I spent my whole life being valued for the wrong reasons," he said quietly. "Watching you made me realize I was tired of it." Lydia studied him for a long moment. "You're educated. You speak like someone who's read philosophy, maybe attended university. Your hands aren't calloused. You moved when my father grabbed me like you expected people to obey you." She crossed her arms. "So who are you really, Eli Carter?" Declan's heart kicked against his ribs. She was too smart, too observant. He'd been careless, let his real self show through the cracks. "Someone trying to figure out who he is," he said, which was true enough. "Does it matter?" "It might. If you're running from the law, or if you're here to scout property for some land company, or if... I'm none of those things. I promise you that." "Then what are you?" "Lost." The admission came out before Declan could stop it. "I'm someone who had everything and felt like it meant nothing, so I left to see if I could find something real." Lydia absorbed this, her expression unreadable. "And you think you'll find it hauling apples in the middle of nowhere?" "I think I might find it working with someone who knows exactly who she is, even when the world tries to tell her she's nobody." She flinched like he'd hit her. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, and Declan saw the vulnerability underneath. The young woman who'd been told her entire life that she was insufficient, that her work didn't count, that her existence was valuable only as long as she remained useful and quiet. "You don't know me," she whispered. "No? But I'd like to go?" The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Lydia's hands twisted in her apron, and Declan watched her rebuild her walls in real time. "Get some rest," she said finally. Tomorrow you'll learn whether you actually meant any of this." She left, pulling the door closed behind her. Her footsteps faded up the stairs, followed by the sound of another door closing. Declan ate the stew mechanically. It was good, better than good. Vegetables cut precisely, seasoning balanced, bread baked with care. Everything Lydia touched, he was beginning to realize, carried this quality. Not perfection, but attention. The mark of someone who did things right because that was the only way she knew how to exist. He finished eating, washed the bowl in the small basin Lydia had left, and lay down on the cot. The blanket smelled like lye soap and sunshine. Outside, wind moved through the orchard with a sound like distant conversation. Sleep took longer than expected. Declan's mind kept cycling through the day. Luther's cruelty, Lydia's exhaustion, the decision he'd made that might have been the most honest thing he'd done in years, or the most elaborate self-deception. Somewhere around midnight, he heard footsteps cross the floor above his head. Lydia, probably, unable to sleep. The house settled and creaked, full of the small noises old buildings make when they think no one's listening. Declan thought about his own house, massive and quiet, where his footsteps echoed in rooms he never used. He thought about dinner parties where people laughed at his jokes because he was Declan Mercer. He thought about women who smiled and touched his arm and looked at him like he was a means to an end. None of them had ever looked at him the way Lydia had tonight. Suspicious, yes, but also curious. Willing to consider the possibility that he might be genuine, even while protecting herself against the likelihood that he wasn't. That look was worth more than anything money could buy. He slept eventually, dreamless and deep, and woke to someone banging on his door. "Up!" Luther's voice carried the cheerful cruelty of someone who'd slept well and was ready to make someone else suffer. "Daylight's burning!" Declan checked the window, still dark. He fumbled for his pocket watch, 4:30 in the morning. "I said up!" Luther banged again. "I'm awake!" Declan's voice came out rougher than intended. "Then move. We've got work." Footsteps retreated. Declan dressed quickly, his body protesting the early hour. At home, he rarely woke before 7. His staff handled the dawn work while he reviewed reports over coffee. The kitchen was warm, lit by a single lamp. Lydia stood at the stove, hair pulled back, already dressed for work. She didn't look at him as he entered. "Coffee's on the table, bread and butter if you want it. We eat real breakfast after morning chores." Declan poured coffee, strong enough to strip paint, and drank it standing. Luther appeared from the hallway, already wearing work clothes and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep well, Eli?" "Well enough." "Good. You'll need your strength." Luther grabbed a biscuit from the plate Lydia had set out. "We're hauling today. The press building needs 3 tons of apples before we can start the next batch. That's about 200 trips from the orchard with full baskets." Declan did the mental math. At roughly 30 pounds per basket, they were looking at moving 200,000 pounds of fruit. "That's a lot of apples. That's Tuesday." Luther's smile widened. "Think you can handle it?" "I'll manage." "We'll see." "Lydia, show him the routine. I've got business in town." Lydia's head snapped up. "You're leaving." "Problem?" Luther's tone carried a warning. "We need 3 people for a haul this size. If you're gone, then you and your new friend will have to work harder." Luther grabbed another biscuit. "Consider it a test. If Eli here is as capable as he claims, 2 should be sufficient." He left before Lydia could argue further. They heard his horse a moment later, hoofbeats fading toward town. Lydia set down the spatula she'd been holding. "He did that on purpose." "I gathered. A haul this size takes 12 hours with 3 people. With 2, we're looking at 16, maybe 18. We'll be working past dark." She finally looked at him. "You can leave now if you want. I won't hold it against you." "I'm not leaving." "You haven't done the work yet. You don't know what you're agreeing to." "Then teach me." Lydia studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Finish your coffee. Meet me at the barn in 5 minutes. And Eli, whatever you think you know about hard work, forget it. You're about to get an education." She was right. The first hour wasn't terrible. Lydia showed him how to select ripe apples, how to fill the baskets to maximize capacity without bruising fruit, how to carry the weight distributed properly to avoid back strain. Declan caught on quickly, his body remembering athletic training from his youth. The second hour, his muscles started complaining. The baskets grew heavier. The distance between trees and press buildings stretched longer. His shoulders burned. By the third hour, he understood why most workers quit. Lydia moved with mechanical efficiency, her slight frame somehow managing loads that should have been impossible. She'd perfected every motion to eliminate waste: reaching, lifting, carrying, dumping, returning. Over and over, an endless cycle that consumed time and energy without apparent progress. "You're tensing your shoulders," she said during one of their brief passes. "Relax, let your legs do the work." Declan tried to follow her instruction. His shoulders ignored him. "Like this," Lydia demonstrated, lifting a full basket with a fluid motion that barely seemed to involve her upper body. "Core tight, legs driving, your shoulders are just holding, not lifting." He attempted to copy her technique. The basket felt marginally lighter. "Better? Better?" She headed back toward the orchard without waiting. They worked through dawn, through the morning sun climbing and heating the air, through what should have been lunch. Lydia produced apples and cheese from somewhere, handed him his share, and kept moving. They ate while walking, while loading, while hauling. "Don't you ever rest?" Declan asked around a mouthful of apple. "Can't afford to." Lydia dumped another basket. "Papa set the deadline. We miss it. He'll blame me, and you, probably, for being inadequate help." "This is impossible." "No, it's just brutal. There's a difference." She grabbed empty baskets. "Come on, we're not even halfway." The afternoon blurred into a haze of repetitive motion. Declan's hands developed blisters. His back locked into spasms he had to work through. Every step became a negotiation between his body's demand to stop and his will's refusal to quit in front of Lydia. She never slowed, never complained. At one point, he watched her trip over a root, catch herself, and keep walking without breaking stride. Her breathing stayed even. Her movements remained precise. It was inhuman, or rather it was what humans became when survival depended on pushing past limitations normal people respected. "How long have you been doing this alone?" Declan asked during one of their passes. 3 years, since the last worker left." "Before that?" "My mother helped when she could, before she got sick." Lydia's voice flattened. "After she died, Papa hired men occasionally. They'd last a week, maybe 2. Then they'd realize he expected them to do 3 people's work for 1 person's pay, and they'd leave." "But you can't leave." "No, I can't leave." They worked through the afternoon, through the sun's slow descent, through the moment when Declan's vision started blurring at the edges. He'd never been this tired, never pushed his body this far. At home, he rode horses other people trained, worked from an office where the hardest labor was signing documents, ate meals someone else prepared. This was real work, the kind that ground people down, that turned bones to dust over decades, that killed people young and left the survivors hollow. And Lydia did it every day. "Almost there," her voice cut through his exhaustion. "Last 20 loads." Declan wanted to collapse. Instead, he filled another basket. Somewhere around load 15, his hands stopped obeying properly. The basket slipped. Apples scattered across the ground. He stood there, staring at the mess, too tired to form a coherent response. Lydia appeared beside him. "Leave it. I'll get them on the next pass." "I can—" "You're done." She took the basket from him. "Go to the house, eat something, sleep." "We're not finished." "I'll finish?" "That's not fair." "Fair?" Lydia laughed, sharp and bitter. "Nothing about this is fair. You gave me 10 good hours. That's more than I expected. Go rest." "I'm not leaving you to— Eli." She looked at him directly, and her eyes were kind despite the exhaustion carved into her face. "You did well. Better than most. But you're about to collapse, and then I'll have to haul you to the house along with the apples. So please, go." Pride demanded he argue. Common sense recognized she was right. Declan's legs were shaking. His vision kept swimming. If he pushed harder, he'd become a liability rather than help. "I'll make it up tomorrow," he said. "Maybe." She was already moving toward the scattered apples. "We'll see if you can walk tomorrow." Declan stumbled back to the house, barely made it to his room, and collapsed on the cot fully dressed. Sleep hit like a hammer. He woke to someone shaking his shoulder. "Eli, wake up!" Lydia's voice, urgent. Declan forced his eyes open. Darkness outside the window. The lamp she carried cast wild shadows. "What time is it?" "Past midnight. You need to see something." His body screamed protest as he sat up. Every muscle had locked during sleep, turning him into a collection of aches barely held together. "What's wrong?" "Just come." He followed her through the dark house and out into the night. The air had turned cold, sharp enough to cut. Stars sprawled above them, more than Declan had ever seen through the smoke and lights of town. Lydia led him to the press building. Light spilled from the open door, and Declan could hear the machinery running. Inside, the press operated at full capacity. Apples moved through the mechanism in steady rhythm, juice flowing into collection barrels. The entire operation ran smoothly, efficiently, tended by no one. "I don't understand," Declan said. "I finished the haul around 10. Lydia's voice was quiet. "Then I started the press running so we wouldn't lose time tomorrow. It'll go all night, process everything we brought in. By morning, we'll have barrels ready for fermentation." "You've been working for 20 hours. Closer to 22. I started at 3 preparing the press." Declan stared at her. In the lamplight, her face looked carved from exhaustion, skin pulled tight over bones, shadows dark beneath her eyes. But she stood straight, watching her machinery with the attention of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. "This is killing you," he said. Eventually. She didn't look at him. "But not today. Today we met the deadline." "Lydia, I know what you're going to say." She finally turned to face him. "That this isn't sustainable, that I'm destroying myself, that there are other options." Her voice stayed level, factual. "But you're wrong. This is the only option. Because if I stop, if I slow down, if I admit I can't do it alone, Papa will use it as proof that women can't run operations like this. He'll sell the orchard, pocket the money, and find some other way to control me." "He's controlling you now." "Yes, but at least I'm doing work I love. At least the cider is mine, even if everyone calls it his." She gestured at the press. "This machinery, I rebuilt it from scraps. That fermentation schedule, I developed it over 5 years of trial and error. Every barrel we sell, every customer who comes back, that's me. My skill, my work. He can take credit, but he can't take the truth." The machinery hummed between them, filling silence with purpose. "You brought me out here to show me this," Declan said. "Why?" "Because you asked how long I've been doing this alone." Lydia's eyes met his. "I wanted you to understand. It's not about strength or stubbornness. It's about the only form of freedom I have. The work is mine. The craft is mine. As long as I can keep doing it, I'm still me. The day I stop, I become whoever my father decides I should be." Declan understood then. She wasn't just making cider, she was making herself, day after brutal day, defining her existence through labor that left marks everyone could see but that nobody valued properly. "I see you," he said quietly. Lydia flinched like he'd struck her. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't see me. Don't acknowledge what I'm doing. It makes it harder." Her voice cracked. "Because when people see me, when they understand, they either try to fix things and make them worse, or they pity me and leave. Either way, I end up more alone than before. I'm not trying to fix anything, and I don't pity you." "Then what are you doing here?" The question demanded honesty. Declan took a breath, reaching for truth he barely understood himself. "Learning," he said finally, "from someone who knows exactly who she is and refuses to let anyone take that away." Lydia studied him for a long moment. "You're strange, Eli Carter. I've been told that before." "Good strange or bad strange?" "I don't know yet." She almost smiled. Almost. "Go back to bed. Tomorrow we start fermentation prep, and that's its own kind of hell. Will you rest?" Eventually, she turned back to the press. "I need to monitor this for another hour. Make sure nothing jams." "I can—" "No. You can barely stand. Sleep. That's how you help me tomorrow." Declan wanted to argue, but his body had already surrendered. He made it back to his room, collapsed again, and this time dreamed of machinery that ran forever, pressing something essential from fruit that fought the process every step of the way. Morning arrived too soon. Declan woke to agony. Every muscle hurt. His hands had developed blisters on top of blisters. His back felt like someone had taken a hammer to his spine. He forced himself upright and immediately understood what Lydia had meant about walking. Each step was negotiation. His body wanted to remain horizontal. His will insisted otherwise. The kitchen was empty when he limped in. Coffee on the stove, still hot. A plate covered with cloth, bread, eggs, bacon. A note beside it in neat handwriting. Eat everything. You'll need it. L. Declan ate mechanically, fueling a body that felt like it belonged to someone else. Through the window, he could see Lydia already working, moving between the press building and storage shed with the same efficient rhythm as yesterday. She'd worked until past 1 in the morning. Probably woke at 3 to start today's prep. Maybe 4 hours of sleep total. And she was still moving. Declan finished eating, forced his protesting body into motion, and headed out to join her. She glanced up as he approached. You look terrible. I feel worse. It gets easier. Your body adapts. She handed him a cleaning brush. We need to scrub the press components before the next batch. The work's not heavy, but it's detailed. Think you can manage? Yes. They worked side by side for the next several hours, Lydia explaining the cleaning process that kept the machinery functional and the cider pure. Declan listened, asked questions, tried to memorize everything she shared. She was a good teacher, patient, clear, willing to repeat explanations without condescension. She corrected his technique without judgment, showed him shortcuts she'd learned through experience, and trusted him with expensive equipment after minimal supervision. You trust people quickly, he observed. No, I evaluate competence quickly. Lydia inspected a component he'd cleaned. You listen well. You don't pretend to know things you don't, and you haven't complained once about work that most men would call beneath them. It's not beneath me, isn't it? She set aside the component. You speak like someone educated. Your hands weren't calloused before yesterday. Everything about you suggests you've lived a different kind of life. So why are you here, scrubbing apple press parts in the middle of nowhere? Declan had been expecting this question in some form. Lydia was too intelligent not to ask it eventually. He'd prepared several possible answers, each containing enough truth to be believable while hiding the larger reality. But looking at her now, covered in the evidence of honest labor, he found he couldn't deploy a strategic lie. I told you before. I was lost. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Declan set down his own brush. I lived a life that looked successful from outside. Money, respect, everything people say they want, but none of it felt real. Everyone around me wanted something. My approval, my resources, my connections. Nobody just wanted me. So you ran away. I walked away. There's a difference. Is there? Lydia's eyes were sharp. Because from where I stand, it looks like you had everything and threw it away to play poor. Meanwhile, people like me would kill for a fraction of your opportunities. The accusation stung because it was fair. Declan had abandoned wealth that Lydia would never possess. Walked away from security she'd never known, all in pursuit of some abstract notion of authenticity. You're right, he said quietly. It's selfish, probably stupid, but I couldn't live that life anymore without understanding if I was worth anything beyond what I represented. And what do you represent? Everything you'll never have, Declan thought but didn't say. Instead, expectations, legacy, other people's ideas about who I should be. Lydia absorbed this, her expression unreadable. At least you had the freedom to leave. Some of us don't get that choice. I know, and I'm not claiming my problems compare to yours. They don't, but they were still problems. Rich people problems. Still problems. She almost smiled. You're not what I expected, Eli Carter. What did you expect? Someone who'd quit by now. Maybe someone with ulterior motives, trying to court me, or scout the property, or gather information for my father. She picked up her brush again. Instead, you're just here, working, not asking for anything except the chance to keep working. Is that so unusual? In my experience? Yes. Lydia's voice softened slightly. Most people want something. You seem to just want to exist. Maybe that's all any of us really want, to exist as ourselves without having to perform for anyone else. That's a luxury most people can't afford. I know, that's what I'm learning. They worked in silence after that, but something had shifted. Not trust, exactly. Lydia was too smart to trust easily, but acknowledgement, perhaps. Recognition that whatever Declan's story was, he wasn't actively trying to harm her, which was more than she expected from most people. Luther returned late that afternoon, drunk enough to be mean, but not enough to be careless. He inspected their work with exaggerated scrutiny, found imaginary flaws, and criticized Declan's technique loud enough for Lydia to hear. Too slow, too sloppy. You're wasting her time having to supervise you. Declan bit back responses that would have ended badly. Instead, I'm learning. I'll improve. You better. I don't keep useless mouths around. Luther turned to Lydia. How much did you get done while babysitting? Everything on the schedule, plus tomorrow's prep. Luther sounded almost disappointed. Well, keep him busy. Maybe he'll quit before I have to fire him. He wandered toward the house, leaving them in the press building. Ignore him, Lydia said quietly. He's trying to provoke you into leaving or fighting back. Either way, he wins. I'm not leaving. We'll see how you feel after a week. But Declan made it through the week, then another. The work remained brutal, but his body adapted like Lydia promised. Calluses formed, muscles strengthened. His hands learned to move with precision. More importantly, he learned to read the orchard like Lydia did, understanding which trees produced the best fruit, which needed pruning, where the irrigation system needed repair. He learned the press building's rhythm, the fermentation schedule's delicate balance, the 100 small decisions that turned fruit into something people valued. And he learned Lydia. She rose before dawn every day, worked until well past dark, and somehow maintained standards that would have broken most people. But she also fed stray cats, talked to her trees like they could hear her, and occasionally laughed at jokes Declan made while hauling barrels. The laugh was rare enough to feel like victory. 3 weeks in, they were working late in the press building when Lydia suddenly stopped mid-motion. What? Declan looked up from the barrel he'd been rolling. You're still here. Where else would I be? Gone. Everyone leaves, but you're still here. She sounded genuinely surprised. Did you want me to leave? No, but I expected it. Lydia set down the tool she'd been holding. Why haven't you? Because this is the first place I felt real in years, Declan thought. Because watching you work is like witnessing someone sculpt themselves from raw determination. Because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, I stopped performing and started just existing. But he said, the cider's good. The company's better. Lydia's face did something complicated. You're a terrible liar, Eli Carter. I'm not lying. No, but you're not telling the full truth either. She moved closer, studying him in the lamplight. I still don't know who you really are, but I know you're not just some drifter looking for work. Does it matter? It might, if you're here for the wrong reasons. What would those be? I don't know. That's what worries me. Her eyes searched his face. Because despite every instinct telling me not to, I'm starting to trust you, and that terrifies me more than any amount of work. The admission hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. Declan knew he should confess everything. Tell her about Declan Mercer, the cattle empire, the deception that had brought him here. But the words stuck in his throat, stopped by the fear that honesty would destroy whatever this was. So instead, he said, I won't hurt you. That's the truth. Everyone says that right before they do. I know, but I mean it. Lydia held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay, I'll choose to believe you. For now. She returned to work and Declan did the same, both of them aware that something had shifted but neither quite willing to name it. The days continued their relentless march. Declan's trial week became 2, then 3, then a month. Luther continued his campaign of casual cruelty, but Declan had learned to deflect it. More surprisingly, he'd learned to support Lydia through it. A look that said, ignore him. A presence that reminded her she wasn't alone. Small things. But Lydia noticed. One evening, as they finished cleaning the equipment, she said, you should know something. What? My father's going to try to get rid of you soon. He's realized you're actually helping, which means I'm less dependent on him. He won't allow that. Let him try. I'm serious. He'll manufacture some crisis, blame you, force you to leave, or make staying unbearable. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. There's no we, Eli. This is my fight. You're just passing through. Am I? Lydia stopped, meeting his eyes. Aren't you? The question demanded an answer Declan didn't have. Was he passing through? Had this started as a temporary experiment in authenticity, a brief escape from his real life? Or had something changed in the weeks of honest labor beside someone who refused to pretend? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm here now. That counts for something. It does, Lydia said softly. More than you know. She gathered her tools and headed toward the house, leaving Declan alone with the press machinery and the smell of fermenting apples and the growing certainty that he'd stumbled into something far more complicated than he'd intended. Because somewhere between hauling baskets and learning Lydia's craft and proving he could survive her father's cruelty, Declan had stopped performing. He'd become the person he was pretending to be. And that person was falling for a woman who didn't know his real name. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, delivered by a rider Declan recognized from his former life. He was hauling barrels when he saw the man dismount near the house, exchange words with Luther, and ride off without glancing toward the press building. Declan's stomach twisted. Nobody from his ranch would come here unless something had gone badly wrong, or unless someone had finally tracked down where Declan Mercer had disappeared to 6 weeks ago. He kept working, forcing his hands to maintain their rhythm even as his mind raced through possibilities. His mother might have hired investigators. His foreman might have followed him that first morning. Someone at the market could have recognized him despite the beard and work clothes. You look like you've seen a ghost. Lydia appeared beside him with empty baskets. What's wrong? Nothing, just tired. She studied him with those two sharp eyes. You're lying. You do this thing with your jaw when you lie. It tenses up. I don't. You do. I've been watching you for 6 weeks, Eli. I notice things. She set down the baskets. So what scared you? The writer? Declan considered deflecting, but Lydia would see through it. She always did. I thought I recognized him. From where? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe you're running from something and worried it just caught up. Her voice stayed level, but he could hear the wariness creeping back in. Are you in trouble? With the law? Or debts? Or... No, nothing like that, I promise. Then what? Before Declan could answer, Luther's voice bellowed from the house. Lydia, get in here. They exchanged a look. Luther rarely summoned her during work hours unless he wanted to humiliate her in front of someone. Stay here, she said. Keep working. Whatever this is, it's better if you're not involved. She walked toward the house with her shoulders already set for impact. Declan watched her go, knowing he should follow her advice but unable to shake the certainty that whatever was in that letter concerned him directly. He gave her 5 minutes, then followed. The kitchen door stood open. Inside, Luther sat at the table with papers spread before him, a bottle of whiskey already half empty despite the early hour. Lydia stood across from him, her face carefully blank in the way Declan had learned meant she was terrified. Ah, the drifter. Luther looked up, his smile vicious. Perfect timing. You should hear this too. Papa, please. Quiet. This concerns the whole operation. Luther picked up one of the papers. I've just received a very interesting proposal. Seems word of our improved production has spread. A gentleman from the Eastern Territories wants to purchase the orchard outright. Lydia went very still. You can't sell. This is our home, our legacy. My legacy, Luther corrected. My property. My decision. He took a long drink, and it's a generous offer, enough to set me up comfortably for the rest of my life. What about me? What about you? Luther's voice dripped false confusion. You're my daughter. You'll be provided for. In fact, the gentleman has made an additional proposal regarding your future. The air in the kitchen changed. Declan felt his hands curl into fists. What proposal? Lydia's voice came out barely above a whisper. Luther smiled. He's a widower, older, established, looking for a capable wife to manage his household and eventually provide heirs. He's seen you at market, been impressed by your work ethic. He's willing to take you as part of the property acquisition. Take me. Lydia repeated the words like they belonged to a foreign language. Like livestock. Like a practical arrangement between sensible people. Luther leaned back. You get security, a proper home, a husband of means. He gets a hard worker who knows her place. I get the orchard off my hands and both of you settled. Everyone wins. Except Lydia, Declan said quietly. Luther's eyes snapped to him. I don't recall asking your opinion. I'm giving it anyway. You're selling your daughter like property. I'm arranging her future, something she's proven incapable of doing herself. Luther stood, swaying slightly. She's 26 years old, unmarried, with no prospects. What exactly do you think happens to women like that? They become burdens on their families until they die alone and forgotten. I'm offering her a way out. You're offering yourself a way out, Declan shot back. This has nothing to do with Lydia's welfare. You want the money, and you want to be rid of the responsibility of a daughter who's smarter and more capable than you'll ever be. Luther's face went purple. How dare you? Stop! Lydia's voice cut through the rising anger. Both men turned to her. She stood very straight, her hands clasped in front of her, and Declan could see them shaking. Both of you, stop. This is my life you're arguing about like I'm not even here. Lydia, Luther began. No, you don't get to speak right now. Her voice shook but held firm. You don't get to sell the orchard I've kept running for 10 years. You don't get to marry me off to settle your debts or fund your drinking, and you especially don't get to pretend this is for my benefit. You ungrateful... I'm done being grateful. The words exploded out of her. I'm done thanking you for the privilege of working myself to death on land that should be mine. I'm done pretending you contribute anything except criticism and cruelty. And I'm done letting you control my future. Silence crashed into the kitchen. Declan had never heard Lydia raise her voice, never seen her stand up to her father so directly. Luther looked genuinely shocked, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly declared independence. You don't have a choice, Luther said finally, his voice dangerous. I'm your father. The orchard is mine. Your future is mine to arrange. You'll do as you're told, or what? Lydia's laugh came out bitter. You'll throw me out? Please do. I'll take my skills anywhere and make a better life than anything you've ever provided. You'll sell this orchard, drink away the money within a year, and die alone wondering why your daughter never visits your grave. Luther moved faster than Declan expected, crossing the kitchen and backhanding Lydia hard enough to snap her head sideways. She stumbled against the counter, hand flying to her face. Declan had Luther against the wall before conscious thought caught up to motion. His forearm pressed across the older man's throat, his other hand fisted in Luther's shirt, his entire body vibrating with rage that wanted to do real damage. Touch her again, Declan said softly, and I will end you. Luther's eyes bulged. He clawed at Declan's arm but couldn't budge it. For the first time, real fear crossed his face. Eli, don't! Lydia's voice came from behind him. He's not worth it. Every instinct screamed at Declan to hurt this man, to use the strength and training he'd spent years developing to show Luther Boone what happened to people who struck someone weaker. But Lydia was right. Luther wasn't worth the consequences. Declan released him and stepped back. Luther slumped against the wall, gasping. Get out, Luther wheezed. Both of you, out of my house. Gladly, Lydia was already moving toward the door. Come on, Eli. Declan followed her outside, his heart still hammering. Behind them, Luther's cursing faded into the November wind. Lydia walked straight to the barn, moving with purpose despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. Declan caught up as she began saddling the horse. Where are we going? Town. To see the land office and find out exactly what legal standing I have. Her hands shook as she worked the straps. I've spent 10 years assuming I had no options. Time to verify that assumption. Lydia, don't. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Don't tell me to calm down. Don't tell me it'll be fine. Don't tell me anything except whether you're coming with me or staying here. I'm coming. They rode in silence, Lydia guiding the horse along familiar paths while Declan processed what had just happened. The letter, the proposal, Luther's casual announcement of selling his daughter like she was part of the inventory, and Lydia's response, raw and furious and finally fighting back. But underneath his anger at Luther, guilt gnawed at Declan. Because he'd been living a lie for 6 weeks, playing at poverty, while possessing wealth that could solve every problem Lydia faced. He could buy the orchard outright, could ensure Luther never controlled her again, could give her the security and recognition she deserved. But doing so would expose everything, would reveal that Eli Carter was a fiction, that the man she'd started to trust was actually Declan Mercer, cattle baron, one of the wealthiest men in the territory, the same kind of powerful man who just tried to purchase her like property. The irony tasted like ash. Clover Ridge appeared ahead, the town busy with midday commerce. Lydia tied the horse outside the land office and went inside without waiting. Declan followed, watching as she approached the clerk with her chin up and her voice steady. "I need to see the deed for Boone's orchard." The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, blinked at her. "Miss Boone? Is your father with you?" "No, I'm inquiring on my own behalf. I'm afraid property matters require the owner's presence." "I understand that. I want to verify who the owner is. That's public record, isn't it?" The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose. Give me a moment." He disappeared into a back room. Lydia stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her. Declan moved closer. "What are you hoping to find?" "Proof that I'm wrong. That somehow, despite everything, my mother left me something. That there's a legal claim I don't know about." Her voice dropped. "Or proof that I'm right, and I have absolutely no standing. Either way, I need to know." The clerk returned with a ledger. "Boone's orchard, 40 acres, registered to Luther Boone as sole owner. Purchased in 1858, no outstanding liens or claims. The deed is clear and uncontested." Lydia absorbed this without visible reaction. "And if he sells it?" "As the sole owner, he has full rights to sell the property and everything on it. The new owner would take possession of all buildings, equipment, and inventory." "What about family members living on the property?" The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Unless they have a legal stake, they'd be subject to the new owner's discretion. Some buyers might offer housing as part of employment terms, but there's no legal requirement." "I see. Thank you." Lydia turned and walked out. Declan followed, his mind racing through the legal and financial mechanisms he knew from his other life. Luther owned everything. Lydia had no claim, no protection, no leverage. She'd spent a decade building something remarkable on land she'd never possess, for a father who saw her as disposable. Outside, Lydia stood beside the horse, staring at nothing. "I was right," she said flatly. "I have nothing. You have your skills, your knowledge, your—" "My what?" "My reputation as Luther Boone's daughter? My references from a father who'd sell me along with the equipment?" She laughed, sharp and painful. "I spent 10 years believing that if I worked hard enough, proved myself capable enough, eventually I'd earn something. Respect, maybe. Recognition. A future that belonged to me. But I was building on sand. None of it was ever mine." Declan wanted to tell her everything in that moment. Wanted to reveal his real identity, promise her security, offer her the orchard as a gift with no strings attached. But the words stuck in his throat, stopped by the knowledge that such a revelation would destroy whatever trust existed between them. "What will you do?" he asked instead. "I don't know." Lydia finally looked at him. "What would you do, Eli, if you were in my position?" The question landed like a blow. Because Declan had never been in her position, had never faced dispossession, had never been valued less than property, had never worked himself to exhaustion for someone who saw him as a burden. "I'd fight," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. "I'd find a way to make them see they can't just erase me." "How?" "Luther owns the orchard. He can sell it whenever he wants. This widower wants a wife who knows cider production, and I'm apparently available for the right price." Her voice cracked. "I don't have leverage. I don't have money. I don't even have the law on my side. Women like me don't win fights against men like my father." "Then we change the fight." "There's no we, Eli. I told you before, this is my problem. It stopped being just your problem when I chose to stay." Declan moved closer, keeping his voice low. "You're right that you don't have money or legal standing, but you have something more valuable." "What?" "You're the only person who can actually run that orchard. Luther can sell the land and equipment, but he can't sell your knowledge. The fermentation schedule you developed, the pressing technique you perfected, the customer relationships you built, that's all yours. And the buyer knows it. Why else would he want you included in the deal?" Lydia stared at him. "You're saying I should use that as leverage?" "I'm saying you should make them pay for what you're worth. If this widower wants a cider operation, he needs you to run it. That's a negotiating position." "Negotiate what? I still lose the orchard." "Maybe. But you could negotiate terms of your employment, salary, housing, a percentage of profits. Make it clear that without you, he's buying dead weight. Declan could feel the business strategist in him emerging, the part that had closed complicated deals by finding leverage where none seemed to exist. Luther wants to sell you cheap. Make yourself expensive. Lydia processed this, her sharp mind clearly working through possibilities. And if the buyer refuses, if he decides it's easier to hire someone else, then he learns the hard way that someone else can't do what you do. The orchard fails, he loses his investment, and you're free to offer your services elsewhere for whatever price you set. That's a gamble. Everything's a gamble. At least this way, you're betting on yourself instead of accepting defeat. She studied him for a long moment. You don't talk like a drifter, Eli. You talk like someone who's negotiated before. Someone who understands business and leverage and strategy. Declan's heart kicked. He'd been careless again, let too much of his real self show through. I've seen deals made, learned from watching. Lydia didn't sound convinced, but she didn't press. Assuming I try this, how do I even make contact? Luther's handling everything. Then we go over his head, find out who the buyer is, arrange a meeting, present your terms directly. I can't just walk up to some wealthy landowner and demand to negotiate. Why not? Because people like that don't negotiate with people like me. I'm the commodity, not a party to the transaction. The bitterness in her voice cut deep, because Declan knew she was right. In his world, the world of wealthy landowners and business deals, women like Lydia were discussed in contract terms but rarely addressed directly. The men decided everything, and the women endured the consequences. It made him sick. Then we make them listen, he said, together. Why are you doing this? Lydia's eyes searched his face. You could walk away right now. Find work somewhere easier, with an employer who isn't trying to sell you along with the property. Why stay? Because I'm falling in love with you, Declan thought. Because watching you fight for yourself is the most honest thing I've ever witnessed. Because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, your orchard became more real to me than the empire I abandoned. But he said, because you deserve better than this. And because I'm tired of watching powerful people treat others like they're disposable. Lydia held his gaze for several heartbeats, then nodded slowly. All right, we do this your way. But if it fails, we figure out the next move. But at least you'll have tried. They rode back to the orchard in the late afternoon light, both silent but thinking hard. When they arrived, Luther's horse was gone from the barn. A note on the kitchen table announced he'd gone to town to finalize arrangements and wouldn't return until evening. Coward, Lydia muttered, crumpling the note. He doesn't want to face me. Good. That gives us time. Declan moved to the window, looking out at the orchard. Do you know the buyer's name? The letter was on the table. Let me check. She rifled through the papers Luther had left scattered across the kitchen. Here, Mr. Harrison Webb, from the Eastern Territories, recently acquired property in the region, looking to expand agricultural holdings. She looked up. I've never heard of him. Declan had. Harrison Webb was a land speculator with a reputation for buying struggling operations, squeezing out whatever value remained, and selling the remains at profit. He went through wives the same way, married young women with useful skills, worked them until they broke or fled, and moved on without consequence. Luther had sold his daughter to a monster. We need to meet with him before the sale finalizes, Declan said, keeping his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. Arrange it so you're the one setting terms, not Luther. How? I don't even know where he's staying. He'll be at the Clover Ridge Hotel. Men like that always take the best accommodation in town. Declan turned from the window. Write him a letter, professional, direct. Inform him that you're the operational manager of Boone's Orchard and that any discussion of the property sale should include your participation. He'll ignore it or show it to my father. Maybe, but you'll have established yourself as a party to the negotiation. If he's smart, he'll realize that cutting you out creates problems. If he's not smart, we'll know what we're dealing with. Lydia worried her lower lip, thinking. Then she moved to the desk in the corner and pulled out paper. What do I say exactly? They spent the next hour crafting the letter, Declan guiding her through language that was respectful but firm, acknowledging the transaction while asserting her expertise. Lydia's handwriting was neat and precise, her phrasing careful. When she finished, she read it aloud. Mr. Webb, I understand you are in negotiations to acquire Boone's Orchard. As the operational manager responsible for all production, customer relations, and technical processes, I respectfully request inclusion in discussions regarding the transition. I am committed to ensuring continuity of operations and would welcome the opportunity to address any questions about the property's potential. Respectfully, Lydia Boone. Perfect, Declan said. Professional without being subservient. You're not asking permission, you're stating reality. And if he refuses, then we know he's planning to run the operation without you, which means either he's incompetent or he's planning to strip and sell. Either way, you're better off knowing. Lydia sealed the letter with wax, her hand steady now that she had a plan. I'll take this to town tomorrow. Post it first thing. Good. In the meantime, we document everything you do. Every process, every technique, every relationship with suppliers and customers. If you end up negotiating, you need to show exactly how much value you bring. They worked into the evening, Lydia describing her methods while Declan took notes. The fermentation schedule that maximized flavor while minimizing loss. The pressing technique that extracted more juice without bitterness. The customer preferences she'd memorized after years of market interactions. The seasonal variations she'd learned to anticipate. It was staggering. She'd built an entire system from observation and experiment, refining processes that many operations never bothered to optimize. No wonder her cider had a reputation. It deserved one. This is remarkable, Declan said, reviewing his notes. You've essentially invented a better method than standard practice. It's just trial and error. It's innovation. Most operators wouldn't bother. They'd use whatever method their fathers taught them and call it tradition. He looked up at her. You've created something valuable, Lydia. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. She ducked her head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. It's just cider. It's your craft. Own it. Luther returned late, drunk and mean. They heard him stumbling through the house, cursing about ungrateful daughters and interfering drifters. But he didn't come looking for them, and eventually his bedroom door slammed shut. Lydia stood from the table where they'd been working. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated. What about you? I need to think, plan, figure out what happens if Webb agrees to meet. Lydia, I'm terrified, Eli. The admission came out quiet. This could work, or it could make everything worse. My father could throw me out tonight. Webb could have me arrested for interfering in a business transaction. I could end up with nothing, not even the illusion of security I have now. Declan wanted to promise her everything would work out, but that would be a lie. The truth was that fighting back carried enormous risk, especially for a woman with no resources and no legal protection. But staying silent carried worse risks. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he said instead. Whatever happens, remember that. You're not a commodity. You're not property. You're someone who built something remarkable against impossible odds. That has value, regardless of what any contract says. Lydia's eyes glistened. You keep saying these things, and I want to believe them. But part of me wonders if you're just another man who'll disappoint me. The words hit harder than any accusation, because she was right to wonder. Declan was lying to her every day, pretending to be someone he wasn't, hiding wealth that could solve her problems. When the truth came out, and it would eventually, she'd have every right to feel betrayed. I can't promise I won't disappoint you, he said quietly, but I can promise I'm trying not to. That's not very reassuring. It's honest. She almost smiled. I suppose that's something. She moved toward the door, then paused. Eli, thank you for staying, for helping, for seeing me when most people don't. I'll always see you, Lydia. She left before he could say anything else. Declan sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by notes about fermentation schedules and pressing techniques, feeling the weight of his deception growing heavier with each passing day. He should tell her the truth, should admit that Eli Carter was a fiction, that Declan Mercer had the resources to buy the orchard outright, that this entire situation could be resolved with money he possessed. But telling her meant risking everything they'd built over 6 weeks. It meant watching her realize he'd been lying from the start, that the trust she'd extended was built on false foundation. It meant becoming exactly what she feared. Another powerful man who saw her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. So he stayed silent, hating himself for it, and climbed into his narrow cot knowing tomorrow would bring decisions that might destroy everything regardless of what he did. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of orchards burning and contracts written in blood, and Lydia walking away without looking back. Morning arrived cold and gray. Declan woke to find Lydia already up, dressed in her best clothes. A dark dress that had been carefully maintained, her hair pinned more formally than usual. She looked like she was preparing for battle. "I'm riding to town," she announced, posting the letter, then waiting at the hotel to see if Webb will meet with me. "I'm coming with you." Eli, I'm coming. You face this. You don't face it alone." Something shifted in her expression. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief. "All right, but let me do the talking. This has to come from me." They rode to Clover Ridge in the early morning cold, the world still waking around them. At the hotel, Lydia posted her letter with the desk clerk, requesting it be delivered to Mr. Webb immediately. Then they waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Lydia sat very straight in the hotel lobby, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. Declan watched her maintain that composure, watched her refuse to fidget or show nervousness even though he could see the tension in her shoulders. Finally, the desk clerk approached. "Miss Boone, Mr. Webb will see you now. Room 204. Lydia stood, smoothed her dress, and headed for the stairs. Declan followed until she stopped him with a look. "Wait here. This is my negotiation." Lydia's "Please, I need to do this myself." He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from whatever was waiting in that room, but she was right. This was her fight, her future, her chance to claim agency over her own life. Following her up those stairs would undermine everything they'd been working toward. "I'll be right here," he said. She nodded once, then climbed the stairs with her back straight and her head high. Declan sat in the lobby watching the second hand crawl around the clock face. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Every instinct screamed at him to go up there, to make sure Webb was treating her with respect, to use his influence to ensure she got a fair hearing. But he stayed seated, jaw clenched, hands fisted in his lap. 20 minutes. The stairs creaked. Declan looked up to see Lydia descending, her face unreadable. She walked past him without stopping, straight out the hotel's front door. He followed, catching up to her beside their horse. "What happened?" Lydia stared at the street, her composure finally cracking. He laughed. "When I explained about my role in the operation, about my expertise, about wanting fair terms," he laughed and said Luther had warned him I might try something like this. Her voice shook. "Then he told me that the arrangement with my father was generous enough. Room, board, and the honor of becoming Mrs. Webb. I should be grateful any man of means would consider me, given my age and lack of dowry. That son of a... I told him I wasn't interested in marriage, that I wanted to negotiate employment terms as operational manager." Lydia's laugh came out brittle. He said that was exactly the kind of spirit he admired. Independent women need firm guidance to reach their potential. He'll enjoy providing it. Declan felt rage building in his chest, hot and violent. "Where does he live? His actual property?" "Why?" "Because I'm going to explain to Harrison Webb what happens to men who treat women like acquisitions." "No, you're not." Lydia turned to face him. "Because that would make things worse. He'd have you arrested for assault, and I'd lose the only person who's actually tried to help me. I can't just let this stand." "You don't have a choice. Neither do I." She untied the horse with shaking hands. "The sale finalizes in 3 days. Webb takes possession of the orchard, and I become his wife or I leave with nothing. Those are my options." "There has to be another way." "There isn't. I checked. I asked. I tried." Her voice cracked completely now, tears finally spilling over. "I tried, Eli. I stood up for myself like you said. I demanded to be seen as valuable, and it changed nothing, because at the end of the day, I'm still just Luther Boone's daughter, still just property to be transferred from one owner to another." Declan pulled her into his arms before thinking better of it. She resisted for half a second, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing with the kind of despair that came from watching hope die. He held her in the cold morning air, feeling her shake against him, hating every circumstance that had led to this moment, hating Luther for his cruelty, hating Webb for his arrogance, hating himself most of all because he possessed the power to fix this, and couldn't figure out how to use it without destroying what mattered most. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. You tried to help, more than anyone else ever has." She pulled back, wiping her face. "But some fights can't be won, not by people like me." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true. Men like Webb, men like my father, they make the rules, they own the property, and write the contracts and decide who matters. Women like me just survive however we can." The resignation in her voice broke something in Declan. Because she was right. The system was designed to give men like him, men like Webb, men like Luther, all the power. And women like Lydia, no matter how capable or intelligent or deserving, were relegated to margins and mercies. He'd benefited from that system his entire life without questioning it, had made deals that probably ruined lives while telling himself it was just business, had wielded power casually because he'd never experienced what it felt like to be powerless. And now the woman he loved was being crushed by that same system, and he had no idea how to dismantle it. 3 days, Lydia said quietly. "I have 3 days to figure out where to go and how to survive without references or resources. Unless you have any brilliant ideas I haven't considered." Declan's mind raced. He could reveal his identity, buy the orchard, solve everything with money, but that would make him exactly like Webb, a rich man deciding Lydia's future without her consent. It would prove that she was right, that powerful men controlled everything, that her agency was an illusion. Or he could stay silent, watch her lose everything, and live with the guilt forever. Neither option was acceptable. "We have 3 days, he said finally. "Let me think. There might be something we haven't considered." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I refuse to believe this is how your story ends." Lydia looked at him with something between hope and despair. "You're either the most optimistic person I've ever met or the most naive." "Maybe both." They rode back to the orchard in silence, both trapped in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Luther's horse stood outside the house, and raised voices carried through the windows. Inside, they found Luther arguing with a well-dressed stranger who could only be Harrison Webb. Both men turned as Lydia and Declan entered. "There she is," Webb said, his smile revealing teeth too white and eyes too cold. "Miss Boone, we meet again." Up close, he was worse than Declan imagined. Handsome in a predatory way, probably late 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His gaze traveled over Lydia with obvious assessment, like he was inspecting livestock. "Mr. Webb," Lydia said flatly, "I was just telling your father how delightful our conversation was this morning. Such spirit." Webb moved closer to Lydia. "I appreciate a woman with backbone. Makes the eventual submission more satisfying." Declan stepped between them before conscious thought caught up. "Stay back." Webb's eyebrows rose. "And who might you be?" "Nobody important," Luther said quickly. "Just hired help. He's leaving soon." "Is he?" Webb looked Declan over with amusement. "Interesting. The help seems rather protective of his employer's daughter." "The help recognizes a threat when he sees one," Declan said evenly. Webb laughed. "A threat? My dear boy, I'm offering Miss Boone an opportunity most women would kill for. Security, status, a proper home, against her will. Women rarely know what's best for them. That's why they have fathers and husbands to decide." Webb turned back to Luther. "You've raised a spirited one, I'll grant you. But I've broken horses with more fire. She'll settle." The casual cruelty of it hung in the air. Declan felt his control slipping, felt the version of himself he'd buried for 6 weeks, threatening to emerge and tear this man apart. But Lydia spoke first. "I will never marry you." Her voice cut clear and cold. "You can buy the orchard, you can force me off the property, but you cannot make me your wife." Webb's smile didn't waver. "Actually, I can. Your father has already agreed to the arrangement as part of the purchase terms. The contract is quite clear. The orchard, its equipment, and the continued services of its operational manager. That's you, Miss Boone. You come with the property." "That's illegal." "No, it's creative contracting. Your father receives payment for the orchard and for arranging a suitable marriage. I receive a functioning operation and a capable wife. You receive security and respectability. Everyone benefits." "Except Lydia," Declan said. "The girl benefits most of all," Luther interjected, his voice carrying the false heartiness of someone trying to convince himself. "I've arranged her an excellent match. She's too stubborn to see it now, but she'll thank me eventually. I'll see you dead first, Lydia said quietly. Luther's face went purple. You ungrateful. Enough. Webb raised a hand. This hostility will pass once the transition is complete. Miss Boone simply needs time to adjust to her new circumstances. He fixed Lydia with a look that made Declan's skin crawl. I'll be a patient husband, at first. Then he turned to Declan, and something dangerous entered his expression. As for you, whatever attachment you formed to Miss Boone ends now. I don't employ men who can't respect boundaries. You'll leave the property by sunset, or I'll have you removed. This is still my property until the papers are signed, Luther protested weakly. And the papers will be signed tomorrow. Consider this advance notice. Webb headed for the door, then paused. Miss Boone, I suggest you spend tonight preparing yourself for our wedding. It will happen immediately upon transfer of property. I've arranged a minister and witnesses. He left, taking his cold smile and colder eyes with him. The kitchen fell into awful silence. Luther wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. It's for the best. You'll see. Get out, Lydia said. This is my house. Get out before I kill you myself. Something in her tone made Luther actually back away. He retreated to his bedroom, leaving Lydia and Declan alone. She stood very still, her face pale and her hands trembling. He's going to do it. My father actually sold me. We'll find a way out. How? Webb's right. The contract probably is legal, or legal enough that fighting it would take time and money I don't have. And even if I could break the contract, where would I go? Who would hire a woman with no references running from a marriage arrangement? Declan knew the answer. Nobody would. Women who fled arranged marriages were considered damaged goods, untrustworthy, prone to causing problems. Most employers wouldn't risk it, which left one option he'd been avoiding. Come with me, he said. Lydia looked at him blankly. What? Leave tonight, before the sale finalizes, before Webb can enforce the contract. Just come with me. We'll figure out the rest. To where? To do what? I don't know yet, but anywhere is better than here. Eli, you're a drifter with no resources. We'd both end up starving on the road. She shook her head. It's a kind offer, but it's not realistic. What if I told you I had resources, that I could keep you safe? Then I'd ask why a drifter has resources, and what you'd want in return for using them. Her eyes searched his face. Who are you really, Eli Carter? The question hung between them, demanding an answer Declan wasn't ready to give, because telling her the truth meant admitting he'd lied for 6 weeks, meant revealing he was exactly the kind of powerful man she'd learned to fear and distrust. But staying silent meant watching her marry Harrison Webb. The door burst open. Luther stumbled in, drunk again despite the early hour. Still here? Thought I told you to pack. Papa, please, but... No more, Luther's voice slurred. Tired of your disrespect. Tired of carrying you. Webb's doing me a favor taking you off my hands. You should be grateful. You sold your own daughter. Arranged your future, like fathers are supposed to. He turned to Declan. And you? Whatever you think you're doing here, playing hero, it ends now. She's not yours. Never was. You're just some drifter who got ideas above his station. Maybe, Declan said quietly. Or maybe I'm exactly what you fear most. What the hell does that mean? Declan looked at Lydia, saw her watching him with those sharp gray eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. It means I'm not who you think I am. The words hung in the air like smoke before a fire. Luther squinted at Declan, confusion mixing with the whiskey fog in his eyes. Lydia had gone completely still. What are you talking about? Luther demanded. Declan pulled off his work gloves slowly, deliberately. His hands underneath were calloused now, marked by 6 weeks of honest labor, but the fingers were long and the nails still carried traces of the care he'd maintained his entire life. He met Lydia's eyes. My name isn't Eli Carter. It's Declan Mercer. The name landed like a stone through glass. Luther's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions too fast to catalog. But Declan kept his gaze on Lydia, watching recognition dawn in her expression. Declan Mercer, she repeated slowly. The cattle baron. The one who owns half the territory. Yes. You're him. You've been him this whole time. Yes. Lydia's hand came up fast, cracking across his face hard enough to snap his head sideways. The shock of it stung worse than the impact. You lied to me. Her voice shook with rage. Every single day, every conversation, every moment I trusted you. All lies. Not all of it. Don't. She backed away from him, her face twisted with betrayal. Don't you dare tell me any part of this was real. You're exactly like him. Like Webb, like my father, like every other man with power who treats people like experiments. Lydia, please. Was it entertaining? Her voice climbed. Watching me work myself to death? Pretending to care while you were really just slumming for amusement? What was the plan, Declan Mercer? Play poor until you got bored, then ride back to your mansion and laugh about the desperate girl who believed you? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She stood there shaking, tears streaming down her face. Explain it to me. Explain how lying to me for 6 weeks was anything except cruel. Luther had recovered from his shock. Declan Mercer. Here, working my orchard like common labor. His laugh came out ugly. This is rich. The great cattle king hiding in my barn. Why? Spying for competitors? Planning to steal my customer lists? I came here because I saw you humiliating your daughter and couldn't stomach it, Declan said flatly. Everything after that was trying to help her. Help her? Lydia's laugh was brittle. You knew. This entire time, you knew you had the resources to fix everything. You could have bought the orchard, could have protected me from Webb, could have done 100 things that would have actually helped, but instead you played farmhand and let me believe I was alone. Because buying your freedom would have been just another man controlling your life. I wanted you to have agency, to make your own choices. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't pretend this was about respecting my agency. You lied because it served whatever purpose you had. Maybe you were bored. Maybe you were having some kind of rich man's crisis. Maybe you just wanted to feel noble. But it wasn't about me. It was about you. The accusation hit home because part of it was true. Declan had come to the orchard searching for something for himself. Proof that he was worth more than his wealth. Validation that someone could value him without knowing his name. Lydia's respect had meant everything precisely because it was earned through honest work. But he'd built that respect on a foundation of lies. You're right, he said quietly. I was selfish. I wanted to know if I could be valued for who I was rather than what I owned. So I hid my identity and convinced myself I was being noble. But really, I was using you to answer questions about myself. Finally, truth. Lydia wiped her face roughly. Get out. Lydia, get out of my house. Go back to your ranch, your wealth, your life of never facing real consequences. Leave me alone to deal with the mess you helped create. I didn't create this. Webb and your father, you made it worse, her voice cracked. Because for 6 weeks, I thought maybe I'd found someone who saw me. Someone who stayed because they wanted to, not because they wanted something from me. And that hope made everything harder. So yes, you made it worse. Now get out. Luther was watching this exchange with growing calculation. Hold on, Declan Mercer just admitted to fraud and trespassing. That's worth something. Shut up, Papa. Lydia's voice was ice. For once in your miserable life, just shut up. Don't take that tone with me. Or what? You'll sell me to another stranger? Oh wait, you already did that. She turned to Luther with the full force of her fury. You sold your own daughter to a man who collects wives like livestock. And now you want to exploit the one person who actually tried to help? You're pathetic. Luther's hand rose, but Declan caught his wrist before it could fall. You've hit her for the last time, Declan said softly. The rage he'd been controlling for 6 weeks leaked into his voice, carrying enough menace to make Luther go pale. Touch her again, and I'll destroy you. Not with violence, with money. I'll buy every debt you owe, foreclose on everything you possess, and make sure you die alone in whatever gutter will have you. He released Luther's wrist with enough force to send the older man stumbling backward. You can't threaten me. I just did. And unlike you, I have the resources to follow through. Declan turned back to Lydia. I know you don't want to hear this, but I can stop the sale. I can buy the orchard right now, tonight, for more than Webb is offering. I can make sure you never have to see either of these men again. And then what? Lydia's voice was hollow. I become indebted to you instead? Trade one owner for another? No. The orchard would be yours. Legally, completely. I'd have papers drawn up transferring ownership to you outright. Nothing's free. What would you want in return? The question cut because it was fair. Declan had spent his entire life watching transactions disguised as gifts, had made deals himself where generosity masked self-interest. Lydia had every reason to distrust an offer that sounded too good. Nothing, he said. I'd want nothing except knowing you were safe. I don't believe you. Then don't. But take the offer anyway. Let me do this one thing right. Lydia stared at him for a long moment. You think buying me an orchard makes up for 6 weeks of lies? No. Nothing makes up for that. But it keeps you from marrying Harrison Webb, and that's worth more than your pride or my guilt. My pride is all I have left. Then keep it. But keep your freedom, too. Luther had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. Now wait just a minute. That orchard is my property. You can't just— I can offer more than Webb, Declan said, not looking at him. 20% above his offer, cash, finalized tonight. You walk away with more money than you dreamed of and no responsibility for a daughter you clearly never wanted. The arrangement with Webb is already not finalized. The papers aren't signed until tomorrow, which means you're free to accept a better offer. Declan finally turned to Luther. So here's your choice. Take my money and disappear, or proceed with Webb's deal and watch me make it my personal mission to ensure you regret it. Luther's face worked through several expressions. Greed won, like Declan knew it would. 25% above Webb's offer. Done. And you don't press charges for the trespassing? I was never trespassing. I was hired labor. Lydia can confirm it. They both looked at her. She stood very still, her arms wrapped around herself, looking between them with an expression Declan couldn't read. Is this really happening? She asked quietly. Are you two actually negotiating my life while I stand here? I'm trying to free you, Declan said, by doing exactly what every other powerful man does, making decisions for me, deciding my future, treating me like property to be transferred. Her laugh came out broken. You're no different than my father or Webb. You just have better intentions. Then tell me what you want. I'll do it, whatever it is. I want you to leave. I want my father to leave. I want every man who's ever decided my worth to leave me alone. She was crying again, angry tears that she wiped away roughly. But that's not possible, is it? Because I don't actually have choices. I have men making offers and calling it freedom. Declan felt something crack in his chest. She was right. He'd walked in here planning to fix everything with money, playing the hero, proving his worth by solving her problems. But he'd never actually asked what she wanted. He'd just assumed, like every other man in her life. I'm sorry, he said. You're absolutely right. I should have asked. So I'm asking now, what do you want me to do? Lydia looked at him for a long moment. I want time to think. I want both of you out of this kitchen while I figure out if accepting help from someone who lied to me is better or worse than marrying a monster. Lydia, out, now, before I change my mind and tell you both to go to hell. Declan nodded and headed for the door. Luther followed, muttering about disrespect and ingratitude. Outside, the evening had turned cold, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Luther started toward his room, but Declan caught his arm. Where's the deed to the orchard? Why would I tell you? Because I'm buying it tonight, and I need to know what I'm purchasing. Luther's eyes narrowed. You're serious about this? Completely. Fine, it's in my desk, but the sale to Webb will be voided when you accept my offer. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers tonight. Declan released Luther's arm. Pack your things. Once this transaction completes, you're leaving. This is my home. Not anymore. You sold it to me, and I'm transferring it to your daughter, who you've abused for the last time. You can't force me out. I can and will. The deed will include a clause prohibiting you from returning to the property. Violate it, and I'll have you arrested. Declan's voice dropped. You wanted to sell, Luther. Congratulations. You just sold everything, including your relationship with your daughter. Now get out of my sight before I forget I'm trying to be better than you. Luther stumbled away, cursing under his breath. Declan stood alone in the cold, looking up at the house where Lydia was probably pacing, trying to decide between bad options. He pulled out his pocket watch, the one piece of his old life he'd kept. Almost 7. His lawyer could be here by midnight if Declan sent a rider now. Papers could be drawn up, signed, and filed before dawn. By the time Webb showed up tomorrow expecting to claim his purchase, the orchard would belong to Lydia Boone. But doing this without her explicit consent was just another form of control. Declan walked back to the kitchen and knocked. "I told you to leave," Lydia called from inside. "I need an answer, yes or no. Should I proceed with buying the orchard?" Silence. Then, "Why are you asking? You were ready to do it without permission 5 minutes ago." "Because you were right. I've been making decisions for you disguised as helping. So I'm asking, do you want me to buy the orchard and transfer ownership to you, or should I stay out of it?" More silence. When Lydia finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "If you buy it, my father gets money he doesn't deserve." "Yes. And you lose a significant amount purchasing property you don't need. I can afford it. That's not the point. The point is why. Why would you do this for me?" Declan leaned against the door, wishing he could see her face. "Because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, watching you work and fight and refuse to break despite everything stacked against you, I fell in love with you." He heard her intake of breath through the door. "And I know that doesn't excuse the lying," he continued. "I know it probably makes everything worse because now you have to wonder if I'm just another man trying to possess you. But it's the truth. I love you, Lydia, not because you're grateful or because you owe me something, but because you're the strongest, smartest, most honest person I've ever met. And if buying you freedom is the only thing I can offer, I'll do it, even if you hate me forever." The door opened. Lydia stood there, her face blotchy from crying, her eyes red and exhausted. "You're an idiot, Declan Mercer. I know. You lied to me for 6 weeks. I know. You made me trust you under false pretenses. I know. And now you're offering me everything I need right when I can't trust anything you say. I know that too." She stared at him, her expression cycling through anger and hurt, and something that might have been longing. "I should tell you to leave, let you ride back to your perfect life, and forget you ever came here." "You should. But I can't marry Webb. I'd rather die." Her voice broke. "So if you're offering me a way out, even if it comes from a liar, I have to take it, because survival beats pride. I'm sorry it came to this." "So am I." She wiped her face. "Buy the orchard. Transfer it to me like you said. Then leave. I don't want to see you again." The words hit like a physical blow. "Lydia, no. You don't get to confess your feelings and expect forgiveness. You lied. That matters more than why you lied or what you feel now. So buy me my freedom, then get out of my life." She started to close the door, then paused. "And Declan, thank you. I hate that I have to say it, but thank you." The door closed. Declan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what he'd just lost. Then he walked to the barn, saddled his horse, and rode for town. The ride to Clover Ridge took 40 minutes in the dark. Declan spent it composing the message he'd send to his lawyer, planning the transaction that would free Lydia while ensuring Luther never controlled her again. At the telegraph office, he wrote quickly, "Purchase Boone Orchard immediately. 25% above web offer. Transfer ownership to Lydia Boone. Prohibit Luther Boone from property. Need papers by dawn. Send confirmation." The clerk's eyes widened reading the amount. "Sir, this is a significant... It's urgent. Send it now." "Yes, sir, Mr. Mercer." The use of his real name felt strange after 6 weeks of anonymity. Declan waited while the clerk transmitted the message, watching the night outside deepen into full darkness. Confirmation came back within 20 minutes. His lawyer would arrive by midnight with papers prepared. The transaction could be completed within hours. Declan paid the clerk and walked to the hotel. Webb was probably asleep by now, dreaming of his acquisition. By morning, he'd discover the property had been sold out from under him. The thought brought grim satisfaction. Back at the orchard, Declan found Luther in the main house, already packing. The man worked quickly, stuffing clothes and valuables into bags with the efficiency of someone who'd fled situations before. "Papers will be here by midnight," Declan said from the doorway. "You'll sign, take your money, and be gone by morning." Luther didn't look up. "This is theft. This is commerce. You wanted to sell. I'm buying. Webb will be furious. Webb can be as furious as he likes. The orchard was never his. And now it's yours. No, it's Lydia's. I'm just the middleman. Luther finally looked at him, something ugly in his expression. You think you're a hero. Riding in to save the girl, buying her freedom, proving you're better than men like me. He laughed. But you're just another rich man playing with other people's lives. At least I'm honest about being terrible. You're not honest about anything. You've lied to your daughter for years, stolen credit for her work, and sold her to a predator. There's nothing honest about you. And there's nothing noble about you. You lied just as much as I did, longer even, so don't stand there judging me when you're no different. The accusation stung because it carried truth. Declan had lied for 6 weeks, had manipulated circumstances to serve his purposes, had used his wealth to solve problems in ways that benefited him as much as Lydia. You're right, Declan said quietly. I'm not noble. I'm selfish and privileged, and I hurt someone I care about by trying to be something I'm not. But at least I'm trying to fix it. You're just taking the money and running. Because that's what smart men do. They take what they can and don't look back. Luther returned to packing. You'll learn that eventually. Once you realize that guilt and love and trying to be better are just weights holding you down. I hope I never learn that. You will. Men like us always do. Declan left him there and walked back outside. The orchard stretched into darkness, rows of trees barely visible against the night sky. Somewhere in the press building, machinery stood idle, waiting for hands that knew how to make it sing. Lydia's hands. He thought about never seeing those hands work again, never watching her move through the orchard with quiet competence, never hearing her rare laugh or her sharp observations or her honest assessments that cut through his pretensions. He'd come here searching for authenticity and found it in a woman who refused to pretend. And then he'd ruined it by being exactly what she'd learned to distrust. Hoofbeats approached on the road. Declan turned to see riders carrying lanterns, his lawyer and 2 assistants arriving early with papers and purpose. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of legal language and signatures. Luther signed the sale documents without reading them, grabbed his payment, and disappeared into the night on horseback with his belongings tied behind him. He didn't say goodbye to his daughter, didn't even look toward the house where she'd spent her entire life carrying burdens he should have shouldered. He just left. The transfer papers were more complex. Declan's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Morrison, laid them out carefully. The deed transfers full ownership to Miss Lydia Boone with no encumbrances, no liens, no obligations. She owns the land, the buildings, the equipment, and all inventory outright. And Luther Boone is prohibited from returning? Permanently. The deed includes a restraining clause. If he sets foot on the property, Miss Boone can have him arrested for trespassing. Good. What about me? Morrison looked up from his papers. Sir, is there any clause tying me to the property? Any claim I retain? None whatsoever. Once you sign the transfer, you have no legal connection to Boone Orchard. Perfect. Where do I sign? Morrison indicated several places. Declan signed quickly, his handwriting familiar and controlled despite the late hour and exhaustion. Each signature felt like cutting a thread, severing himself from something precious. But it was what Lydia wanted: freedom, complete ownership, no obligations to the man who'd lied to her. It's done, Morrison said finally. Miss Boone now owns the orchard free and clear. I'll file these papers first thing tomorrow morning. File them tonight if possible. I want everything official before Harrison Webb realizes what happened. Morrison nodded. I'll ride to the county office now. They'll open early for the right fee. Pay whatever it takes. The lawyer and his assistants departed, leaving Declan alone with the deed that was no longer his to give. He walked to the main house and knocked on Lydia's door. No answer. Lydia, the papers are signed. The orchard is yours. Still nothing. Declan tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. He found a lamp and lit it, illuminating the kitchen where they'd shared so many early mornings and late evenings. On the table, a note in Lydia's precise handwriting. I'm staying in the press building tonight. Leave the deed. Lock the door behind you. Goodbye. Declan set the deed on the table, weighing it down with a jar of preserves. Then he wrote his own note on the back of her message. The orchard is yours. Everything, land, equipment, recipes, future. Luther is gone and prohibited from returning. Webb has no claim. You're free. I'm sorry for every lie and every moment I made you doubt yourself. You deserve better. You deserve truth. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. The man you knew as Eli Carter loved you. The man I actually am loves you more. Be well, Lydia Boone. Build something extraordinary. He left the note beside the deed, extinguished the lamp, and walked out into the cold November night. His horse waited where he'd tied it hours ago. Declan mounted and sat for a moment, looking at the orchard one last time. The press building showed a single light burning. Lydia, probably working despite everything because work was how she processed the world. He wanted to go to her, wanted to explain everything he should have said 6 weeks ago, wanted to promise he'd never lie again, that he'd spend the rest of his life proving himself worthy of her trust. But she'd asked him to leave, so he turned his horse toward home and rode away from the only place that had ever felt real. The journey back to his ranch took most of the night. Dawn was breaking when Declan finally saw his property spread across the horizon, vast and wealthy and utterly empty. His foreman met him at the stable, relief and irritation mixing on his weathered face. "Mr. Mercer, we've been worried sick. Where have you been?" "Working," Declan said, dismounting. "Learning things I should have known years ago." "Sir?" "Never mind. Is my mother awake?" "Not yet, but she'll want to see you immediately when she is." "I'm sure she will." Declan handed over the reins. "Take care of him. He's earned rest." He walked to the main house, his boots echoing on the porch he'd crossed 1,000 times without noticing. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Expensive, tasteful, maintained by staff he barely knew. It felt like a mausoleum. Declan climbed to his room and stood at the window, looking out at land he owned but had never really worked. The view was beautiful and meaningless. 6 weeks ago, he'd left this place searching for proof that he mattered beyond his wealth. He'd found that proof in an orchard where a woman made cider with such care that every bottle was perfect, where honest work meant something, where the person he became, calloused hands, aching muscles, unimportant name, had been valued for what he contributed rather than what he represented. And he'd destroyed it by lying. "You're home." Declan turned to find his mother in the doorway, her expression caught between relief and fury. She was dressed impeccably despite the early hour, every hair in place, every detail controlled. "I'm back," he corrected. "I'm not sure this was ever home." "Where have you been? Your foreman said you disappeared 6 weeks ago without explanation." "I was working an orchard, making cider, learning what it feels like to earn respect honestly." His mother stared at him. "Have you lost your mind?" "Probably. Or maybe I found it." Declan turned back to the window. "I met someone, Mother, someone extraordinary, and I ruined it by being exactly what you raised me to be." "And what's that?" "A liar. Someone who manipulates situations to get what he wants. Someone who uses money to solve problems without considering what that costs other people. That's called being successful." "No, that's called being cruel." He faced her. "I pretended to be poor to see if someone could value me without knowing my name. And she did. She saw worth in someone she thought was a drifter with nothing, but I took that gift and built it on lies. So you've had your adventure and learned a lesson. Now you can return to your responsibilities." "What if I don't want to?" "Want to?" His mother's voice sharpened. "Since when does want matter? You have obligations, Declan. A ranch to run, a legacy to maintain, expectations to meet. Father's expectations, not mine. Your father built something remarkable. You dishonor his memory by abandoning it for some romantic fantasy about honest labor. I dishonor his memory by perpetuating a system that values wealth over people, by treating others the way he taught me to, as resources to be managed rather than humans to be respected." Declan felt something loosening in his chest, words he'd never said finding their way out. "I don't want to be him, Mother. I don't want to die wealthy and alone, surrounded by people who fear me more than they love me." "Your father was respected. He was feared. There's a difference." "And this woman you met at an orchard taught you that?" "She showed me what it looks like to build something real. To work with integrity even when no one's watching. To refuse to compromise yourself even when it costs everything." Declan's voice softened. "She's the strongest person I've ever met. And I broke her trust because I was too much of a coward, to be honest." His mother was quiet for a long moment. "Did you love her?" "I still do." Then why are you here instead of fighting for her? The question surprised him. She told me to leave. She said buying her freedom didn't make up for lying to her. And you just accepted that? The son I raised would have fought harder. The son you raised is the problem, Mother. That version of me lies and manipulates and uses money to control situations. That's what drove her away. Or maybe, his mother said slowly, that version of you is afraid of being rejected for who you really are. So you're using her anger as an excuse to run away. The words hit hard because they carried truth Declan hadn't wanted to face. He told himself he was respecting Lydia's wishes by leaving, but really, he'd been protecting himself from the possibility that honesty might not be enough, that the real Declan Mercer might be someone she couldn't love. What am I supposed to do? He asked quietly. Stop hiding. From her, from yourself, from the possibility that you might actually deserve happiness. His mother moved closer. Your father was many things, not all of them good, but he never ran from a fight. If you love this woman, go back. Be honest. Let her decide whether the real you is worth forgiving. And if she says no, then at least you'll know. You can stop wondering and start healing. She touched his arm, a rare gesture. But Declan, if she could value you when she thought you were nobody, imagine what she might feel for the man who's brave enough to be completely honest. Declan looked out at the dawn breaking over his property, thinking about another dawn breaking over an orchard he no longer had any claim to, thinking about a woman who was probably already working, maintaining machinery and pressing apples and building something extraordinary from ruins. I don't know if she'll listen, he said. Then make her listen. Not with money or power or manipulation, with truth, with the version of yourself you discovered in her orchard. His mother smiled slightly. The version that knows what it means to work and bleed and earn something real. Declan felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that running had solved nothing. I need to clean up, get some rest, then I'm going back. Good. And Declan, when you see her, don't lead with apologies. Lead with honesty. Tell her who you are and what you want and let her choose knowing everything. She left him there as the sun climbed higher, painting his empty room with light that revealed every carefully maintained surface. Declan looked around at the wealth he'd inherited and felt nothing but exhaustion. But when he thought about cider pressing and calloused hands and a woman who'd taught him what strength really looked like, he felt something stirring. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe the possibility of it. Declan slept for 3 hours and woke with his decision already made. He bathed, shaved the beard he'd grown for disguise, and dressed in clothes that actually fit. Not the costume of poverty he'd worn to the orchard, but not the ostentatious wealth of a cattle baron either. Just himself, whoever that was. His mother was waiting in the breakfast room when he came down. You're going back, she said. Not a question. Yes. What will you say to her? The truth. All of it. Then I'll accept whatever she decides. His mother nodded slowly. Your father would have called that weakness. I'm calling it growth. She paused. If she forgives you, bring her here. I'd like to meet the woman who taught my son what I couldn't. Declan felt something warm move through his chest. She may not forgive me. Then you'll learn to live with it, but at least you'll have tried. He left within the hour, riding toward Clover Ridge with his heart hammering and his mind racing through everything he needed to say. The November morning was cold and clear, the kind of weather that made the whole territory feel sharp-edged and vivid. When he reached town, he stopped first at the land office to confirm the deed had been properly filed. The clerk showed him the recorded documents. Boone Orchard, 40 acres, registered to Lydia Boone as sole owner, no encumbrances, Luther Boone permanently prohibited from the property. It was official. She was free. The knowledge settled something in Declan's chest, even as it tightened the fear of what came next. He'd given her the one thing she needed most. Now he had to face whether that was enough, or whether 6 weeks of lies had destroyed any possibility of them finding their way back to each other. He rode to the orchard slowly, giving himself time to rehearse words that kept rearranging themselves in his mind. But when he crested the final hill and saw the property spread below, every planned speech evaporated. The orchard was alive with activity. Lydia moved between the press building and storage shed with her familiar efficiency. But she wasn't alone. 3 women worked alongside her. Locals from town, Declan recognized after a moment. And in the apple rows, 2 more people harvested fruit into baskets. She'd hired help. Within hours of gaining ownership, she'd started building the operation she'd always needed. Declan dismounted near the barn and walked toward the press building. One of the women spotted him first, nudging Lydia and pointing. Lydia looked up, saw him, and went very still. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the distance. Then Lydia set down the barrel she'd been carrying and walked toward him. She stopped about 10 feet away, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "I thought I told you to leave." "You did. I'm not good at following directions." "Apparently not, since you also ignored my instruction not to lie to me for 6 weeks." The barb landed, but Declan didn't flinch. "You're right. I failed at the most basic requirement of trust. That's why I'm here." "To apologize again?" "I heard you the first time." "No. To tell you the truth, all of it, without excuses or justifications." He gestured at the workers. "But if you're busy, I can wait." Lydia studied him, her gray eyes sharp and assessing. "I'm always busy. That's what happens when you actually own something, instead of just working it for someone else." But her voice softened slightly. "I have 10 minutes. Talk fast." She led him away from the workers, toward the edge of the orchard where they'd have privacy. The morning sun filtered through bare branches, casting patterns on the ground between them. "My name is Declan Mercer," he started. "I'm 32 years old. I inherited a cattle ranch and fortune from my father when I was 23. I've spent the last 9 years managing an empire I never wanted, surrounded by people who value me for what I represent rather than who I am." Lydia listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral. 6 weeks ago, I came to Clover Ridge Market feeling like nothing in my life was real. Everyone around me wanted something. My money, my influence, my approval. I couldn't remember the last time someone looked at me and just saw a person instead of an opportunity. He met her eyes. "Then I saw you, working yourself to death while your father took credit, being erased from your own story, and I recognized something." "What?" "That we were both trapped. You by poverty and circumstances. Me by wealth and expectations. Different prisons, same result, neither of us free to be ourselves. So you decided to play poor." Her voice carried an edge. "Slumming for authenticity." "Yes. And that was selfish and short-sighted and unfair to you." Declan didn't look away. "I told myself I was helping you, but really, I was using you to answer questions about myself. I wanted to know if someone could value me without knowing my name or wealth. And you did. You saw worth in Eli Carter, the drifter with nothing. That felt like proof that I mattered beyond my money. But Eli Carter didn't exist. No, he was a fiction, a version of me without the baggage." Declan paused. "Except he wasn't entirely fictional. The man who hauled apples and learned your craft and stayed when things got hard, that was real. Those parts of me exist. I'd just buried them under years of playing the role people expected." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "You're saying the person I knew was real, just not complete?" "Yes. Everything I said about admiring your strength, valuing your knowledge, caring about your future, all true. The only lie was my name and circumstances. That's not a small lie, Declan. I know, it's the foundation everything else was built on. And when foundations are false, the whole structure is compromised." He took a breath. "But I'm here to build something new, something honest, if you'll let me." "And what would that be?" "I don't know. That's up to you." Declan spread his hands. "I can't undo the lying. I can't make the past 6 weeks something they weren't, but I can be completely honest from this moment forward. I can tell you that I love you. Not the idea of you, but the actual complicated, brilliant, fierce person standing in front of me. I can tell you that I want to be in your life in whatever capacity you'll allow. And I can accept that you might not want me in it at all." Lydia looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You think honesty fixes everything?" "No, but it's the only place to start." "What about the power imbalance? You're still Declan Mercer, cattle baron, one of the wealthiest men in the territory. I'm still just a cider maker. There's nothing just about what you do. And wealth doesn't make me more valuable than you. It just makes me more comfortable. It makes you more powerful. Power doesn't disappear just because we're being honest about it." She was right, and Declan knew it. The structural inequality between them existed regardless of their feelings. He could buy and sell properties on impulse. She'd spent her entire life one bad harvest away from destitution. That gap didn't close just because he loved her. "You're absolutely right," he said. "I can't pretend we're equals when the whole system is designed to give men like me advantages. But I can choose how I use that power. I can choose to support rather than control. I can choose to ask instead of assume. I can choose to be someone who adds to your life instead of taking from it. And if you slip, if old habits resurface and you start making decisions for me, then you call me out. You set boundaries. You remind me that loving someone means respecting their agency even when you think you know better." Declan stepped closer. "I'm not perfect, Lydia. I'm going to make mistakes. But I'm willing to learn, to change, to become someone worthy of your trust." "That's asking a lot." "I know. Too much, probably. But I'm asking anyway." Lydia turned away, looking out at her orchard, the rows she'd maintained alone for years, the press building where she'd perfected her craft, the land that finally belonged to her. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Do you know what the hardest part was? Not the lying, though that was bad enough. It was realizing that even the moments I thought were genuine probably weren't. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every time you looked at me like you actually saw me, I have to question all of it now. Because how do I know what was real and what was performance?" The pain in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. Declan wanted to promise her that everything had been real, but he couldn't, because some of it hadn't been. Some of it had been calculated, strategic, designed to maintain his cover while satisfying his need for authenticity. "I can't give you that certainty," he admitted. "I can tell you that the respect was real, the admiration was real, the falling in love was real. But I can't prove it, and I can't make you believe it. All I can do is show you, consistently, over time, that the person I'm choosing to be now is someone you can trust." "How long would that take? Months? Years?" "However long you need. I'm not going anywhere." Lydia turned back to him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You say that now, but what happens when I'm not convenient anymore? When maintaining a relationship with a cider maker becomes more trouble than it's worth?" "That won't happen." "You can't promise that." "You're right. I can't." Declan held her gaze. "But I can promise to be honest when things get difficult instead of disappearing. I can promise to work through problems instead of throwing money at them. I can promise that you'll always know where you stand with me." "Those are words, Declan, just words." "Then let me prove them with actions. Let me show up consistently, honestly, as myself." He paused. "And if I fail, if I prove myself unworthy of your trust, then you'll have earned the right to tell me to leave permanently. But give me the chance to try." Lydia wiped her eyes roughly. "I hate that I want to believe you. I hate that part of me is already forgiving you when I should be telling you to go to hell. So tell me to go to hell. I deserve it." "You do?" She laughed, broken and tired. "You absolutely do, but I'm not going to." Declan's heart stuttered. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm willing to consider the possibility that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define everything, that maybe, sometimes, second chances are worth the risk." She crossed her arms. "But I have conditions." "Anything. First, no more lies, ever, even small ones, even lies of omission. If I ask you something, you tell me the truth." "Agreed. Second, you don't solve my problems with money. If I need help, I'll ask. Otherwise, you respect that this orchard is mine to build or fail with." "Agreed." "Third, we take this slowly. No grand gestures, no rushing. You want to earn my trust? You earn it day by day, not with dramatic declarations." "Agreed." "And fourth," Lydia's voice wavered slightly, "if you hurt me again, if you lie or manipulate or use your power against me, you leave. No second chances after the second chance. Understood?" "Understood." "And Lydia, thank you for being willing to try." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't actually done the work." "Then let me start." Declan gestured toward the press building. "What needs doing? I'm here to help if you'll have me." Lydia studied him for a long moment. "You want to work? After buying me the orchard, you want to come back and haul apples?" "I want to be useful. I want to contribute to something real. and I want to spend time with you while proving I can be trusted." He smiled slightly. "Also, I miss the work. My ranch has people who do everything. I'd forgotten what it felt like to end the day physically tired." "You're insane." "Probably, but I'm honest about it now." She almost smiled. "Almost." "Fine. There's a barrel in the press building that needs moving. The women I hired are capable, but they're still learning the systems. You can help with the heavy lifting while I train them." "What are you paying them?" "Fair wages, plus a percentage of profits once the operation expands." Lydia's chin came up. "I'm not running a charity, but I'm also not replicating my father's exploitation. These women work hard. They deserve compensation that reflects it. That's good business and good ethics." "It's what should have been happening all along." She started walking toward the press building. "Come on, the work doesn't wait for emotional conversations." Declan followed, feeling something settle in his chest. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was possibility. A chance to rebuild from honesty instead of deception. The work was exactly as hard as he remembered. Harder, maybe, because his body had softened during 3 days away. But Declan welcomed the burn in his muscles, the ache in his back, the simple clarity of physical labor. He worked alongside Lydia and her new employees, learning their names and their stories. Mary, whose husband had died leaving her with 3 children and no income. Sarah, who'd left an abusive home and needed work that didn't require references. Jean, who'd been told she was too old to be useful and was proving that assessment wrong. Each of them had come to Lydia's orchard looking for the same thing Declan had sought 6 weeks ago, a place where their contribution mattered more than their circumstances. And Lydia was building that place deliberately, consciously, with the same attention she brought to her cider. "You're doing something remarkable here," Declan said during a brief break. "Not just making a business, but creating opportunity." "I'm doing what should be standard," Lydia corrected. "Treating people with dignity, paying them fairly, recognizing their worth. The fact that it's remarkable says more about how broken the system is than how good I am. Still, it matters. It matters because I remember what it felt like to be invisible, to work yourself to death for someone who treated you like equipment." She looked at him. "That's something you'll never fully understand, Declan. No matter how hard you worked here, you always knew you could leave. Return to wealth and comfort and security. These women don't have that option. Neither did I, until you bought me my freedom." The observation landed precisely where it hurt most, because she was right. Declan's time at the orchard had been voluntary, temporary, a choice he could unmake whenever circumstances became too difficult. Real poverty, real powerlessness, real desperation, those were experiences he could observe but never truly inhabit. "You're right," he said. "I can't fully understand, but I can listen, learn, try to use whatever privilege I have in ways that actually help." "Can you?" Lydia's eyes were sharp. "Because that's the test, Declan. Not whether you can haul apples or profess love, but whether you can recognize your advantages without defensiveness and use them without condescension." "I want to try." "Then try. Show me what that looks like." They worked through the afternoon, Declan following Lydia's instructions and watching how she trained her employees. She was patient but exacting, explaining not just what to do, but why each step mattered. She corrected mistakes without humiliation, praised competence without excess, and created an environment where people felt safe asking questions. It was leadership stripped of ego, authority built on expertise rather than fear, everything his father's leadership had lacked. As the sun began its descent, Lydia called an end to the workday. Her employees packed up, thanking her with genuine warmth before heading home. Then it was just the two of them in the press building, surrounded by the smell of apples and the hum of machinery. "You can go too," Lydia said. "I'll finish the evening prep." "I'd like to stay, if that's all right." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but Declan, this doesn't mean everything's fixed. We're still figuring out whether this can work." "I know, and that's fine. I'm not expecting instant forgiveness." "Good, because you're not getting it." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the routine familiar despite the changed circumstances. Declan found himself relaxing into the rhythm, his body remembering how each task connected to the next. "I hired a foreman," he said eventually, "for my ranch, someone capable who can run things without my constant oversight." Lydia looked up. "Why?" "Because I want time to be here. Not every day, Not in a way that intrudes on your life, but enough to prove I meant what I said about being consistent. He paused. If that's acceptable to you. What about your responsibilities? I'll handle them, but I'm done pretending the ranch needs me hovering over every decision. My father ran it that way because he didn't trust anyone. I'm choosing to trust capable people to do their jobs. That's different. It's necessary. If I want to be present in your life, I can't be chained to an operation 3 hours away. Lydia absorbed this. And if we don't work out, you'll have restructured your entire life for nothing. Not for nothing, for the possibility of something real. Declan met her eyes. And even if we don't work out, having better balance between work and life is worthwhile. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You learned it by doing actual work. I learned it by watching you, seeing how you approached craft with care and attention, how you built systems instead of just reacting to crises. He smiled slightly. Everything good I discovered here came from observing you. Lydia looked away, but he caught the slight color in her cheeks. Don't do that. Do what? Say things that make me want to forgive you before I'm ready. Sorry. I'll try to be less honest. That's not what I meant, and you know it. They finished the evening prep as darkness settled over the orchard. When everything was secure, Lydia walked him to his horse. Will you come back tomorrow? She asked. Do you want me to? I'm asking, aren't I? Then yes. I'll come back tomorrow. And the day after, if you'll have me. We'll see. Lydia wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. Declan, what you said about loving me, did you mean it? Every word. Even knowing I might never fully trust you again? Even knowing that. Love doesn't require certainty, Lydia. It just requires showing up. She nodded slowly. All right, then show up, consistently, honestly, and we'll see if that's enough. He wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and promise everything would work out, but that would be rushing, assuming, taking instead of asking. So instead he mounted his horse and said goodnight. The ride back to his ranch felt different than the journey earlier. Not lighter, exactly, but less weighted with dread. Possibility instead of certainty, but possibility was enough. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Declan rode to the orchard most mornings, worked alongside Lydia and her employees, and returned to his ranch in the evenings to handle business that actually required his attention. He learned to delegate, to trust his foreman's judgment, to recognize that his constant oversight had been more about control than necessity. And slowly, carefully, he and Lydia began rebuilding something that might eventually become trust. It wasn't smooth. There were arguments about boundaries, moments when Declan's instinct to solve problems with money collided with Lydia's need for independence. There were days when old hurt surfaced and she couldn't look at him without remembering the lies. But there were also moments of genuine connection, shared laughter over machinery that refused to cooperate, quiet conversations during evening prep. The satisfaction of watching the orchard transform under Lydia's ownership into something thriving and respected. 3 weeks after Declan's return, Harrison Webb appeared at the orchard demanding to speak with the new owner. Lydia met him at the property line with Declan standing silently behind her, present for support but letting her handle the confrontation. You cost me a significant investment, Webb said coldly. I had plans for this property. Then you should have finalized the purchase before someone offered better terms, Lydia replied, her voice steady. The orchard was for sale. It sold. That's how commerce works. Your father and I had an arrangement. My father had no authority to arrange anything involving me, and now he has no authority over this property at all. She crossed her arms. Was there something else? Webb's eyes flickered to Declan. I see you've found other patronage. I found partnership, Lydia corrected, with someone who respects my capability instead of trying to purchase it. How idealistic. I wonder how long that will last when reality intrudes. Longer than your interest would have, Declan said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken, and Webb turned to him with recognition dawning. Declan Mercer, I didn't realize you'd developed an interest in cider operations. I've developed an interest in supporting talented people doing excellent work. How charitable. Webb's smile was cold. Though I notice you bought the property yourself before transferring it. That kind of control is hard to relinquish, isn't it? I don't control anything here. Miss Boone owns this orchard free and clear. I'm just someone who helps when asked and leaves when not needed. We'll see how long that arrangement lasts. Webb tipped his hat mockingly toward Lydia. Good luck, Miss Boone. You'll need it when your patron loses interest. He left, and Lydia let out a breath she'd been holding. That was unpleasant, she said. You handled him perfectly, clear, firm, no room for misinterpretation. I wanted to throw something at him. That would have been satisfying but impractical. Lydia almost smiled. Thanks for letting me lead that. It's your property, your confrontation. Still, some men would have stepped in, taken over, proved their dominance. I'm trying not to be some men anymore. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. You're doing better. At the trying, I mean. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. Winter arrived properly in mid-December, bringing cold that settled deep and snow that transformed the orchard into something from a painting. Work continued despite the weather. Cider needed tending regardless of temperature, and Lydia's growing customer base demanded consistent supply. Declan celebrated his 33rd birthday hauling barrels through snow. His expensive education and inherited wealth meaning nothing compared to the simple satisfaction of completing hard work well. His mother visited the orchard one cold afternoon, arriving unannounced in a carriage that made Lydia's employees stare. Declan introduced them awkwardly, uncertain how this meeting would go. His mother extended her hand to Lydia. Miss Boone, I've heard a great deal about you. Mrs. Mercer. Lydia shook her hand cautiously. I hope not all of it was complaints about your son's strange behavior. Most of it was admiration, actually, and some very honest self-assessment about his failings. His mother smiled slightly. He seems to have found someone willing to hold him accountable. Someone has to. Indeed. May I see your operation? I'm curious about what inspired such dramatic life changes. Lydia gave her a tour, explaining the processes with the same clear expertise she brought to everything. Declan watched his mother listen attentively, ask intelligent questions, and treat Lydia with genuine respect rather than the condescending interest wealthy women often showed people they considered beneath them. When the tour concluded, his mother pulled Declan aside. She's remarkable. Nothing like the women you usually associate with. I know. Good. Don't lose her through stupidity. I'm trying not to. Try harder. That woman is the best thing that's ever happened to you. His mother paused. Your father would have hated her. She's too independent, too capable, too unwilling to be controlled, which is exactly why she's right for you. After his mother left, Lydia found Declan in the press building. Your mother isn't what I expected. What did you expect? Someone colder, more dismissive. Instead, she actually listened to me talk about fermentation schedules like it mattered. It does matter, and she's capable of recognizing value when she sees it. She loves you. Lydia said it like a revelation. I could see it in how she looked at you, worried but proud. She's proud of who I'm becoming, not who I was. Are those different people? I'm starting to think they might be the same person, just finally being honest about it. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, then Lydia spoke again. Declan, I think I'm ready. Ready for what? To forgive you, not forget. I'll never forget, but forgive. Move forward instead of staying stuck in past hurt. Declan set down the tool he'd been holding. Are you sure? No, but I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of protecting myself so carefully that I can't let anyone in. She moved closer. You've shown up every day for weeks. You've respected my boundaries, admitted your mistakes, and worked to be better. That's more than most people ever do. It's the minimum you deserved. Maybe, but it's also rare. Lydia took a breath. I still don't completely trust you. That will take more time, but I trust that you're trying, and that's enough to start with. What does starting look like? I don't know. Maybe something like this. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, like testing whether something fragile could hold weight. Declan kissed her back carefully, aware that this moment mattered more than any business deal he'd ever closed or any inheritance he'd ever received. When they pulled apart, Lydia was crying. I'm terrified, she whispered, that I'm making a mistake, that I'll regret this. You might. I might mess up again despite trying not to. That's not reassuring. It's honest. Declan touched her face gently. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise effort, consistency, honesty, and love that doesn't evaporate when things get difficult. That's going to have to be enough. Is it? Enough, I mean? Lydia smiled through tears. Ask me again in a year. They stood there in the press building, surrounded by the evidence of her craft, and Declan understood that this was the thing he'd been searching for 6 months ago. Not validation or proof of worth, but connection. The terrifying, exhilarating recognition that someone saw him completely, flaws and strengths, privilege and growth, and chose him anyway. Spring arrived eventually, painting the orchard green and filling the air with the scent of apple blossoms. Lydia's operation had tripled in size, her cider earning a reputation that spread far beyond Clover Ridge. She hired more workers, built a second press building, and began teaching classes on cider production to women from neighboring territories. Declan watched her build an empire of her own, not inherited, not purchased, but created through skill and determination and the kind of leadership that inspired rather than commanded. His own life had simplified considerably. The ranch ran smoothly under his foreman's management. Declan maintained oversight and made major decisions, but he'd stopped treating constant vigilance as virtue. He'd learned to trust, to delegate, to recognize that his presence wasn't always necessary or helpful. It left him time for what mattered, working the orchard several days a week, learning Lydia's craft in deeper detail, being present in a relationship that required attention and care rather than grand gestures. One morning in late April, Lydia found him repairing a fence that had been damaged during the winter. "I've been thinking," she said. About? About what you said when you first came back, about wanting to be in my life in whatever capacity I'd allow. Declan set down his hammer. And I've decided I'd like you in my life in the capacity of partner. Real partner. Not just someone who helps out occasionally. What does that look like? I don't know exactly, but I know I want to build something with you. Not you building something for me, or me accepting your charity, but both of us creating something together. She paused. Is that something you'd want? More than anything. Even though it means combining your very public life with my still growing operation? Even though people will talk about the cattle baron working a cider orchard? Let them talk. I stopped caring what people think the day I started caring what you think. Lydia smiled. That's remarkably sappy, but true. Also true. She held out her hand. Partners then, in work and in whatever this is between us. Declan took her hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own now. Partners. Equal ones. With you doing what I say when it comes to cider production. Obviously, you're the expert. And you managing the business expansion, since you actually know how to negotiate with distributors. I can do that. And both of us figuring out the relationship part as we go, making mistakes but being honest about them. That's the most important part. They stood there in the spring morning, hands clasped, looking out at an orchard that had become more than property. It was possibility made real. Proof that people could change, that trust could be rebuilt, that the strongest foundations were laid one honest day at a time. By summer, they'd formalized their partnership legally, Lydia maintaining sole ownership of the orchard, but Declan investing in expansion and equipment in exchange for a percentage of profits. It was carefully structured to preserve her independence while acknowledging his contribution. Some people in town gossiped about the arrangement, said Lydia had traded one wealthy patron for another, said Declan was slumming with inappropriate company, said the whole thing would collapse within a year. But the orchard thrived. Lydia's cider won awards at the territorial fair. Her employees became skilled craftspeople who trained others. And slowly, the operation became known not just for quality product, but for proving that businesses could succeed while treating people with dignity. Declan's mother visited frequently, forming an unlikely friendship with Lydia based on mutual respect and shared exasperation with Declan's occasional lapses into wealthy man assumptions. Your son tried to buy me a new press without asking, Lydia reported during one visit. Of course he did. Did you make him return it? I made him donate it to a struggling operation 3 counties over that actually needed it. Excellent. He learns faster when there are consequences. Declan, listening to this exchange, felt something warm and right settle in his chest. This was family. Not the cold, formal relationships of his upbringing, but the messy, honest connections built on shared values and genuine care. One evening in early autumn, Declan found Lydia sitting on the porch of the house she'd reclaimed from her father's abuse. She'd renovated it slowly over the summer, transforming it from a place of pain into a home that reflected her rather than haunted her. Tired? He asked, settling beside her. Exhausted, but satisfied. She leaned against him. We pressed 4 tons today. The new equipment is working perfectly. The equipment you insisted on researching and selecting yourself rather than letting me just buy whatever was expensive? That equipment? Yes. She smiled. Turns out when you involve the people actually using the equipment in the selection process, you get better results. Imagine that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the orchard gold. Declan? Do you ever regret it? Leaving your ranch? Restructuring your life? All of it? Never. Do you regret letting me back in? Sometimes, when you do something stupid, but mostly no. She turned to look at him. You know what the strangest part is? What? I don't think about the lies anymore. Not daily, anyway. They happened. They hurt. We moved past them. But they're not the defining thing anymore. What is? This, right now, building something real together, choosing each other every day instead of being trapped by circumstance. She paused. That's what love is, isn't it? Not the absence of mistakes, but the commitment to keep choosing despite them. I think so, though I'm not an expert. Neither am I. We're learning together. That's better anyway. As winter approached again, bringing the anniversary of the day Declan first walked into Lydia's life, they celebrated quietly. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just another day of work, another evening of shared satisfaction, another moment of choosing to stay. The orchard had become famous enough that people came from distant territories to study Lydia's methods. She taught generously, sharing knowledge that others might have hoarded, because she understood that rising alone meant nothing. Real success was lifting others with you. And through it all, Declan remained present, not hovering, not controlling, but contributing, using his privilege consciously to create opportunities rather than obligations, learning that partnership meant sometimes leading, sometimes following, always listening. The man who'd arrived at Clover Ridge Market searching for proof of his worth had found something better. Purpose that didn't require validation. Love that didn't demand performance. A life built on honest work and honest connection. Some nights, lying beside Lydia in the home they'd built together, Declan thought about the person he'd been before. The hollow success, the empty relationships, the fortune that had felt like a cage. He'd given up nothing that mattered and gained everything that did. What are you thinking? Lydia asked one such night. That I love you. That I'm grateful you gave me a second chance. That this life we've built is worth more than anything I inherited. That's a lot of thinking. I'm a thoughtful person. You're a reformed, wealthy man, learning to be better. There's a difference. Am I succeeding? Most days. She kissed him softly. And on the days you're not, you're at least trying. That counts for something. For everything, Declan corrected. It counts for everything. Outside, wind moved through the orchard with that familiar sound like distant conversation. The trees that had witnessed Lydia's struggle and Declan's transformation stood guard over the life they'd built from honesty and hard work and the radical decision to keep choosing each other. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but filled with possibility. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But there would also be harvest seasons and shared laughter and the deep satisfaction of building something real together. And that, Declan had finally learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.